archaeology of Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls tonight. So you're looking at Qumran by the Dead Sea there in Israel. The Qumran community, sometimes called the Chad, and these ruins, you're looking at some of the caves there and Wadi Qumran. There you can see it from the south, a little bit of oasis there in the desert there. And we'll talk a little bit about this very important place as you look at the plateau, which overlooks the Dead Sea. So very interesting location for this relatively small community, but very, very important. So 5 views on the very place that we looked at there from Megan Brosch's work. What was Qumran? These are just 5 different views. A place of commerce, a place of trade on a major trade route, the view of Crown and Cansdale, a rustic villa, the view of Donseal, a Roman fortress, the view of Golb. Of course, we know that the Romans were the ones who came and wiped out the community there about AD 68 in the Jewish-Roman War. Hirschfield, Fortified Country to State, sort of combines views 2 and 3. But Broschi and many others see Qumran specifically as the residence of the Essenes, a group of Jews who copied the scrolls, waited for the coming of a religious and political Messiah to deliver Israel from the Gentiles. Here's a view from Qumran looking to the cliffs, specifically 11 caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls and various fragments of scrolls were found. The question is, as you think about these cliffs and some of the debate and discussion that you'll read about, were these scrolls brought from Jerusalem because of the Jewish-Roman War? Were they brought down here to Qumran? Were they hid away for safekeeping? Were they copied by priests from those, or even Essenes? There were Essenes who lived in Jerusalem. Were they the ones that copied these scrolls? Some of them are biblical, some of them sectarian. Did they copy them there in Jerusalem, bring them down here, and then hide them in the caves, or were they actually all copied here at Qumran and then again hidden in caves? Some have said, for instance, we'll see a picture of K4. Some believe that K4 was actually the library for Qumran. So a lot of debate and discussion as to the connection of the scrolls with the community. And again, because this is the lowest place on the earth, the Dead Sea, Qumran overlooks the Dead Sea, does have that view there. While you're looking at the map of Qumran and the blue areas, mikveh pools, as Jews, they were into ritual purification. So there was an aqueduct that brought the water into Qumran. And so that aqueduct was able to then fill these various pools that were used by the Jews there, the Essenes, I believe. Again, you're looking at the Qumran excavations, and the first excavation team back in 1951 was led by Roland DeVoe and G. Lancaster Harding. And so that first season, November and December, Basically, discovery of various coins and pottery. That pottery connection, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Some of them were found in these pots and scroll jars, they're called. So some have seen a connection there, especially from Cave 1 to Qumran, because there was a pottery kiln that was discovered there in Qumran itself. In 53, the tower and the central buildings were excavated. In 54, the refectory, potter's workshop discovered. And then in 55, the water system revealed specifically. The fifth season, they began working at the cemetery, 1956. In 59 to 60, a man by the name of John Allegro tried to locate the treasures mentioned in the Copper Scroll. And DeVoe claimed that Allegro basically destroyed a lot of their work that they had done in the previous 5 seasons of excavation. And then that leads us to 1967, the Six-Day War. Prior to that, this area was under the control of Jordan. But with the Six-Day War, Israel basically takes over Qumran from Jordan and now supervises the site. So here's a Qumran view to Cave 1. And some old picture here of excavations being done there in Cave 1. And Cave 4, which you can easily see from Qumran itself. You see Cave 4 there. There's probably the most famous cave in terms of, because it's close to Qumran. So it was Muhammad Adib, we'll look later at the discovery, was the one who found 7 scrolls in Cave 1. Sometime the end of 1946 and into 1947. We're not exactly sure of when he discovered the first scrolls there in Cave 1. But most famous is the complete Isaiah scroll that was found. There was an incomplete Isaiah scroll, the Genesis Apocryphon, commentary on Habakkuk, sometimes the interpretive method called Pesher, the rule of the community, the Thanksgiving hymns, and the War Scroll, 1QM. So these were the 7 famous scrolls discovered there in Cave 1. Cave 4 had many fragments of scrolls. When we think about the books of the Hebrew Bible, parts or portions of every Old Testament book discovered except for Esther. Here's the entrance to Cave 4. The Qumran excavations. Well, let me say something about Cave 4 before I get to that, since I'm showing a picture there. DeVoe said this, the Bedouin had removed more than half the fill of the cave and worked so carefully that only a few small fragments were found in the debris. The archaeologists themselves explored the lower levels of Cave 4 and a small underground room that the Bedouin had not reached. And they gathered 1,000 fragments belonging to at least 100 different manuscripts. So this was a very significant find there. Lawrence Schiffman, Jewish scholar, and other Dead Sea Scrolls scholars believe Cave 4 was the library for the Qumran community, very close to Qumran itself. In the Qumran cemetery, this was used, of course, before the destruction of the site in 68. The dating agrees with that of the community who lived in Qumran. Possibly the people of the community there lived in caves, possibly tents, just using the town itself for their ritual purification, baths in the mikvah, and for copying the scrolls as well as eating. So the Qumran Cemetery is a community burial place. They're not family tombs here. Another picture of the cemetery there. The number of excavated tombs is small. They practice their burial, some with and some without a wooden coffin in individual graves. The burials lack inscriptions. The graves are carefully dug out and arranged, so it seems to rule out what some scholars thought, that the tombs were dug in haste for a large group of dying people. So that would be an argument against that. It's not like they were thrown into graves as a result of the Romans' conquest of Qumran. So the cemetery is located about 30 to 40 meters east of the settlement. There's about 1,100 graves. 52 of them have been excavated, 43 by DeVoe. So the tombs and graves are arranged in neat, ordered rows. They are oriented in a north-south axis, and each grave is marked by a heap of stones. You can sort of see that there. Each one of them have a heap of stones on the surface. The tomb form is a shaft hewn in a rectangular cavity at the bottom. The head was oriented to the south, placement with a stone beneath it and small stones placed beside it. Arms stretched along the sides of the body or were crossed at the pelvis. In 3 tombs, remnants of wooden coffins were found. In the main cemetery area, all the excavated tombs contained males. In the extended areas of the cemetery, 4 of the 6 skeletons examined were female and 1 was a child. So again, there's a lot of discussion about was this a male-only community? Were there those who were married, and were there children? At least it seems that in the cemetery we do find at least 1 child and some females there. Now, the Essenes, like the Pharisees, believed in the resurrection of the righteous, and so that's interesting to think about that as we look at these tombs. Again, a Qumran grave there. Let's talk about the water cistern here. The amount of water, Bryant Wood says, needed for a community of about 200 people and their animals for the 8 months of the year during which rainwater was not available is about 9,112 cubic feet. So the water volume of the cisterns without steps was around 259 cubic meters, 9,147 cubic feet, more than enough to meet the practical needs of the community. Oh, here's one of the mikvah here, ritual bath, which was used frequently by these Essenes, if they were the people of the community there. The steps obviously show earthquake damage. Josephus writes in his book, The Jewish War, Book 2, page 129. After working without interruption until the 5th hour, they would reassemble in the same place. They were girt with linen loincloths, and they would bathe themselves in cold water. After this purification, they would assemble in a special building to which no one is admitted who is not of the same faith. They themselves only enter the refectory if they are pure, as though in a holy precinct. So Josephus indicates that the Essenes had 4 different levels of initiation. They are divided into 4 lots according to the duration of their discipline. The juniors are so inferior to their elders that if the latter touched them, they washed themselves as though they had been in contact with a stranger. Jody Magnus has written a book called The Archaeology of Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls. She says the presence of steps and additional features such as partitions indicates the pools were designed to serve primarily as mikvaot. The restricted access to immersion water described in the sectarian scrolls and by Josephus means that the pools could not have functioned simultaneously as a mikvah and as a community cistern. For only those individuals who were permitted access to the mikvaot could drink from them. Otherwise, they would have been denied access to the water in these pools. No such restrictions applied to the cisterns and other pools that were not used for purification purposes. The absence of heated pools or steam rooms and systems for heating water, mosaic floors, and built-up bathtubs indicates that the pools of Qumran were not part of a bath house. So again, they would walk down the steps into the water and come back out of the water, their ritual purification. The scriptorium, Roland DeVoe identified the remains of a room that he said was used by the scribes at Qumran to copy the Dead Sea Scrolls. A stairway led to the upper room, which was used as a scriptorium for the copying of the scrolls. So here's inside the scriptorium, but this is what it probably looked like. The identification of the scriptorium rests on finds of 2 kinds, 3 inkwells, one made of pottery, the other of bronze unearthed in Locus 30, and an earthenware one found in adjacent Locus 31. The remains of a structure that fell from the upper floor. The structure is made of mud, rubble, and mortar covered with smooth plaster. After reconstruction, it looks like a table a little over 5 meters, that is 16.4 feet long, and approximately 0.5 meters, 1.6 feet wide, and approximately 0.7 meters, 2.3 feet high. So you see this table here was what they would have copied the scrolls. So these are been found now in a museum, desks that would have been used by the Essenes to copy these scrolls. And again, we have an idea of what they did when they were copying them in the scriptorium. Here's some of the inkwells that were used. So 3 inkwells discovered here in the scriptorium, one made of bronze and 2 of clay. During the Second Temple period, scribes wrote with ink on parchments made of animal skins. And ancient ink was usually black, prepared from soot or resin. Fragments of parchment with red ink also were found. The tower, Jody Magnus says the location of the tower in the middle of the north side of the settlement indicates that it served as a watchtower, because like today, most people approaching Qumran in antiquity would have come from the direction of Jerusalem and Jericho to the north. There was no entrance to the tower at the ground level. Instead, it was accessed at the second-story level by climbing the staircase. The staircase consisted of a flight of stone steps attached to the south wall. DeVoe noted that the isolation of the tower reflects the inhabitants' concern for security. It was separated from the rest of the settlement by two open spaces on the east and south, each of which were closed at the end by doors. The tower guarded the main point of entry into the settlement. The water channel, Jody Magnus says the water was brought by aqueduct from Wadi Qumran. It flows into the Dead Sea at the foot of the southern end of the marl terrace on which the settlement sits. Branches of the Qumran aqueduct wound through the settlement and supplied all the pools, which could have been filled by a single flash flood. Decantation basins placed in front of each pool or group of pools served as settling tanks, catching the silt carried by the floodwaters before it entered the pool. The aqueduct entered the settlement at its northwest corner. There was a sluice gate to break the rapid flow of the floodwaters. From here, the water spread out into a broad, shallow decantation basin adjoined by a small stepped pool. Here's the water channel coming down from the mountains, surrounding mountains, down to the settlement. The scroll jars were placed by the Essenes in caves, and the scrolls were inside these scroll jars. I mentioned the 7 scrolls that were found in Cave 1. Jody Magnus again says there's perhaps no more distinctive object associated with Qumran than the cylindrical jars that reportedly contain the first scrolls discovered in Cave 1. And so sometimes they are called scroll jars. According to one account, the initial discovery, when the Bedouins first entered Cave 1, they discovered a row of these jars covered with bowl-shaped lids. Most of the jars were empty, but one contained 3 scrolls, 2 of which were wrapped in linen. 2 of the intact jars removed from the cave by the Bedouins were purchased by Sukenik for the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. In February and March of 1949, Harding and DeVoe conducted excavations in Cave 1. In addition to fragments of scrolls and linen, they recovered potsherds representing at least 50 different cylindrical jars and the bowl-shaped lids that covered them. 2 years later, Harding and DeVoe conducted the first season of excavations at Qumran and sunk into the floor of one of the rooms, L2. They found an intact but empty cylindrical jar covered with a limestone slab. On the floor beside it was a coin of the Roman procurators dated 10 CE. The excavators noted that the jar was identical with those found in Cave 1 and concluded, we thus, in a small area so far excavated, now have a direct connection with the scrolls. That's quoted by Jody Magnus, page 79 and 80. So the find of the scroll jar there in Qumran links it to the scroll jars in Cave 1 and links basically the community with the scrolls. Here's the Qumran dining room. So after their ritual purification bath, that's when they would dine. Stone vessels. Stone vessels characterize Jewish settlements of the Second Temple period, and their existence at Qumran attests to the identity of its population. Jewish law commanded that pottery vessels that became unclean were to be broken, but stone vessels retained their purity. This law is evident in the water and wine miracle that Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee, John chapter 2, verse 6. The vessels were made of limestone. Cups were crafted by scraping the stone with knives and chisels, and the jar was made on a lathe. The phylactery. Anybody know what a phylactery is?
Like a prayer box they put on their arms and forehead.
Right. It had portions of the Torah in it, right? The Tephilim. Phylacteries are small boxes containing a small scroll written with Torah verses and serve as a reminder that God took Israel out of Egypt. Jews wore them wrapped around one arm or on the head, typically the forehead, while praying. Sometimes you'll see that the Jews who go to the Western Wall, you'll see the phylacteries that they're wearing there. The Qumran phylacteries are the earliest ever found. Made of leather, contain small compartments where the written parchments were placed. The cache of coins more than 1,250 coins were discovered in Qumran. 561 of these coins were deposited in 3 jars. DeVoe assumed that the hoard was hidden due to an emergency, but today scholars believe that the hoard was actually a foundation deposit, that the large number of coins found in so small a site suggests that they were used possibly to pay workers employed here or in the date plantations that were in the vicinity. Well, let's move to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. We talked a little bit about Qumran in our first half hour. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. I had the opportunity of going to the Cincinnati Museum Center to see a display of the Dead Sea Scrolls as a traveling exhibit. And this is a book that I picked up there. It's called Dead Sea Scrolls, Life and Faith in Ancient Times. I'll just read a little section here. 2,000 years ago in the Judean desert, on the northern shores of the Dead Sea, a group of people placed their religious writings in 11 remote caves, never returning to retrieve them. Discovery of the text, beginning in 1947, remains one of the great archaeological events of the 20th century. These fragile parchment scrolls, ravaged, some of them by insects and the elements, preserved by the surroundings that were hot and dry climate and the darkness of the caves in which they were placed. Among them are the oldest existing copies of the Hebrew Bible, written when Judaism and Christianity were just taking form. So we have over 800 manuscripts. Not all of the Dead Sea Scrolls are biblical scrolls. We have biblical scrolls and we have sectarian scrolls. And not all of them are, a complete scroll or even an incomplete scroll, because many of them are just sort of pieces, parts of various manuscripts discovered in the 11 caves near Qumran. So date of writing, basically 250 BC to AD 68. So approximately 300 years, give or take. Hidden in scroll jars, not all of them. Some of them were found as a result of just archaeologists looking and sifting the dirt on the various caves. And obviously they were placed there before the destruction of Qumran by the Romans in AD 68. Well, let's talk a little bit about the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we mentioned that these Bedouin were the ones who discovered the scrolls in 1947. This is before Israel became a nation, declared a nation by the United Nations in 1948. Mohammed Ahmed el-Hamad, nicknamed Edib, that is the wolf, was the one who found Cave 1. And the story goes that there were some goats or sheep that were near Cave 1, and he threw a rock into Cave 1, and he heard a breaking of pottery sound. He was excited. He thought that there might be treasure inside, thinking that it would be gold or something like that. But what they found were these scroll jars, and inside they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, biblical treasure, as we would say. Very important discovery. And I mentioned those the 7 manuscripts that were discovered by the Bedouin. So there's a picture where Cave 1 is located there with the arrow. And there's the listing of the scrolls. And so it's interesting when you study the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, the first number is indicating what cave in the Qumran region. Q stands for Qumran, and then you have an abbreviation. So 1Q ISA, the Great Isaiah Scroll. And then ISA B, which is the second copy of Isaiah. 1QP stands for Pesher, Habakkuk, the Habakkuk Pesher. 1QS, the Community Rule Scroll. 1QH, the Thanksgiving Hymns, some of which from the Psalms. 1QM, the War Scroll. And 1QAP, the Genesis Apocryphon. So I'm not going to read everything from my account. You can read the details, but just want to highlight a few things. This man named Kando was the agent for the Bedouin who discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. So he plays an important part. So the scrolls discovered by the Bedouin come to this man, Kando, and then he begins to interact with several different people. One of which is Samuel, Metropolitan Samuel, of St. Mark's Syrian Orthodox Monastery. And in 1947, July 5th, he attempts to sell 4 of the scrolls to Samuel. And then Kando, basically, he buys the scrolls. According to Samuel, he paid $250 for the 4 scrolls. And so John Trevor, important because he's one of the first ones who saw and photographed these scrolls. So November 29th, 1947, we moved to Professor Sekinik from the Hebrew University. He's going to buy 2 scrolls. The one is the War Scroll there. And then we have, of course, in 1948, Israel becomes a nation. We come to 1949. Harding and DeVoe are the ones who excavate Cave 1. Here's the Great Isaiah Scroll, photographed by John Trevor, now located in the Shrine of the Book Museum there in Jerusalem. So this ad was placed in the Wall Street Journal. Just take a look at that ad there. Biblical manuscripts dating back 200 BC are for sale. This would be an ideal gift to an educational or religious institution by an individual or group. Well, the reason they were brought to America was because of the fighting between the Jews and the Arabs as a result of the United Nations declaring Israel to be a nation. And so the copper scrolls discovered in 1952, but what happened was that let's see if I have a picture of Yadin here. That's Cave 4. There it is. In 1954, it was Yagil Yadin, who was the son of Sukenik, who purchased those 4 Dead Sea Scrolls in New York City for the state of Israel for $250,000, July 1st, 1954. So just wanted to link that ad with what he did there. Now, these copper scrolls discovered in 1952 in Cave 3. March 14th, 1952. So what was interesting about that is that because they're written on copper, how do you unroll them? And so that was sort of a process in learning how can they preserve them without destroying what was actually written on these copper scrolls. But K4 is discovered in 1952, and of course you got hundreds of pieces, parts of the manuscripts, many of them from the different books of the Hebrew Bible. Cave 5 also discovered. Cave 6. So the Bedouin, they're the ones discovering the caves, basically selling the fragments. For instance, the fragments, 15,000 fragments from Cave 4 sold to Jordan for what would be equivalent to $842,000. There's Cave 7 that was discovered there. And Cave 8. And Cave 10, discovered in 1955. So 1956, we have the cutting of the copper scrolls. So from the time that they were discovered until this, they're trying to just how they're going to cut them without destroying what is written on them. Discovering the Dead Sea Scrolls. It really was using tape. That's what they did to sort of try to link pieces, parts together. The problem is that they didn't have a process of digitizing the Dead Sea Scrolls like we have today. And so we come to the Shrine of the Book museum in Jerusalem that houses the Dead Sea Scrolls. As you can see, it looks like the top of the scroll jar. And inside you have, I believe it's a facsimile of the original Isaiah scroll there on display. I believe all of the Dead Sea Scrolls are in vaults underneath the display area. Maybe they do bring some out to be seen. Here again, the Isaiah scroll. Well, let's talk a little bit about the community at Qumran. I talked about their discovery, and I talked a little bit about Qumran. Let's talk about the scrolls themselves after we talk about the community itself. So to get the context here, we're talking about the intertestamental period and the time of the Hasmonean priests. So again, you have the Maccabees were the ones who revolted against the Seleucid rulers. You think about Antiochus Epiphanes, of course, who offered the pig on the altar there in the temple there in Jerusalem. That basically led to the Maccabean revolt. So, and then you have, of course, the liberation of Jerusalem, the cleansing of the temple, the celebration of Hanukkah. So after the Maccabees, you have the Hasmonean priests, Jonathan, described here in Josephus' Antiquities, book 13. He was the son of Mattathias. Eschol has said, among scholars of Qumran scrolls, there's a lengthy controversy regarding the identity of the wicked priest, who's mentioned 5 times in the Pesher Habakkuk, an additional 2 times in 2 Pesherim from Qumran Cave 4. majority of scholars have accepted the suggestions of Geza Vermes and Joseph Milik in identifying the high priest as Jonathan, son of Mattathias. The following details about the wicked priests are elucidated in the Pesharim. Pesher Habakkuk says that the evil priest was originally considered legitimate at the beginning of the service. It's only when he ruled over Israel did he abandon the Lord and begin to betray the statutes for wealth. It's noted the wicked priest committed abominations in Jerusalem. He defiled the temple and robbed the riches of orphans. The attempt of the wicked priest to kill the teacher of righteousness is mentioned twice. In Pesher Habakkuk, it's said that the wicked priest attacked the teacher of righteousness on Yom Kippur, while the teacher of righteousness was fasting in his place of exile. From this description, it seems that the arguments between the teacher of righteousness and the wicked priest was the question of the calendar, since the wicked priest, who was probably the high priest, could not leave the temple on the Day of Atonement. It seems that the wicked priest attacked the teacher of righteousness on his Yom Kippur, which was not the Yom Kippur for the wicked priest. In the Pesher Psalms, it was noted the wicked priest tried to kill the teacher of righteousness on account of the statute and the law, which the teacher of righteousness sent to the wicked priest. In Pesher Habakkuk, it said that the Lord took vengeance upon the wicked priest because he attempted to hurt the people of the sect. Likewise, there are two descriptions in his Pesher which note that the wicked priest's enemies caught him, tortured him, and took revenge upon his corpse. The mention of the wicked priest in Pesher Isaiah is fragmented and nothing can be learned specifically from it. The widespread opinion that the treatise was sent by the teacher of righteousness to the wicked priest also explains why the author of Pesher Habakkuk took the trouble to differentiate between the beginning of the wicked priest's life, in which he was a positive leader, and the end of his life when he betrayed the statutes for wealth. Vanderkam, this is the book that you're reading, says if Jonathan was the wicked priest, the teacher was active during his time as high priest. It's worth noting that First Enoch, chapter 90, 6 through 10, Jubilees 23-26 allude to a reform or penitential movement apparently just before around the Maccabean times. No scrolls passage associates these early years of the movement with Qumran. The commentary on Habakkuk refers to a place of exile for the teacher and his band, but does not identify it by name. We could recall that the Damascus document speaks several times about going to Damascus and about a new covenant there. Whether the teacher and his followers actually went to Damascus, we do not know. So apparently there's a conflict between the teacher of righteousness, which is viewed as the founder or leader of the Essenes, versus the wicked priest. Debate as to the identity of this wicked priest. And here we see the possibility that it was Jonathan. Simon, who was high priest after Jonathan, signs the treaty with Rome, 139 BC, which guarantees the priest having political power. So, as you know, during the times of the Gentiles, no Jewish king sits on the throne of David, ruling Israel from Jerusalem. So basically, the times of the Gentiles began 586 BC with Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians coming to destroy Jerusalem and Solomon's temple. Now we know that the line of Messiah, even Jehoiakim was a prisoner of Nebuchadnezzar, and he is treated well. He's able to eat there even in Babylon. So the line of Messiah continues there, at least mentioned in Matthew chapter 1. John Hyrcanus, Hasmonean ruler, 135 to 104, also described by Josephus in Antiquities 13, 8 through 12. During the reign of Hyrcanus, two religious political parties emerged. The Hasidim, the conservative wing, who resisted the Hellenization that was started by Alexander the Great when he conquered the region. This was the separatist group, the forerunner of the Pharisees. The Hellenizers were those who accepted the Greek culture. This group became the Sadducees. Before his death, John Hyrcanus repudiated his Pharisaic affiliation and declared himself to be a Sadducee. Alexander Jannaeus, the ruling priest of Judea from 103 to 76, described in Josephus' Antiquities, book 13, 12 through 16, and Jewish War. Some believe that he was the first Hasmonean to give himself the title king. Josephus divides the rule of Alexander Jannaeus into 3 periods. During the first period, he conquers the coast of Israel from Mount Carmel to the border of Egypt. The second period, 95 to 83, conflicts with the Pharisees. Nabateans in the east. Alexander Jannaeus was defeated by the Nabateans. He had to give up territories to them. In the third period, 83 to 76, he fought wars to obtain the cities of the Decapolis. He became sick during the siege of Ragaba and died. The enemies of Alexander Jannaeus, 88 BC, including the Pharisees, summoned Demetrius of Syria to invade Judea, and they promised him aid. So Demetrius invaded Judah and defeated Alexander Jannaeus in battle. Alexander Jannaeus, in retaliation, caught 800 Jewish leaders and crucified them in Jerusalem. These 800 Jewish leaders were probably Pharisees. The Qumran community referred to these Pharisees as those who seek smooth things in the commentary on Nahum. Josephus refers to this event. He says the Jewish multitude did not lay aside their quarrels with him. When the foreign auxiliaries were gone, they had a perpetual war with Alexander until he had slain the greatest part of them and drove the rest into a city. When he had demolished the city, he carried the captives to Jerusalem. His rage was grown so extravagant, his barbarity proceeded to a degree of impiety. He ordered 800 to be hung on crosses in the midst of the city. He had their throats of their wives and children cut before their eyes. And these executions he saw as he was drinking and lying down with his concubines. So truly you have a priest who was corrupt. High priest in Israel, corrupt. And that helps you understand why there would be a group of Jews who separated themselves from the temple, what was going on in Jerusalem, and would go out to the desert, specifically to Qumran, and have a very strict sect of the Jews, the Essenes. So understanding the corruption of the Hasmonean priests and their lust for power and their cruelty, barbarity, helps you to see why you would have the formation of the Essene community. So some dates to remember: Rome conquers Israel, 63 BC. The Romans destroy the Qumran community in the Jewish-Roman War, AD 68. Some of the Essenes apparently escaped Qumran and went to Masada. Evidence of that in Masada. The Jews commit mass suicide there in Masada, AD 73, rather than surrender to the Romans. General Sulla there. So when you do the reading, you'll see different views on who are these people of the Yachad, the community there in Qumran. Schiffman says they're Sadducees. Louis Ginsburg said they're Pharisees. Millick, Roth, and Driver said they're Zealots. So they begin to try to argue for the different groups. Talman says it's just an unknown Jewish group. Eisenman was the one who said it was an early Christian sect. Some tried to connect the Essenes with John the Baptist because of the baptisms that John was performing. Sukenik, the Hebrew University, said that the group was the Essenes. And that is my view that I argue for in some of my papers. The descriptions of the Essenes are found in Josephus, Philo, and Pliny the Elder. So it's interesting to read the descriptions of these scenes and then read the community rule, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and do a comparative study, which I tried to do and looked at some of the parallels. So 1QS is the rule of the community. So here's some parallels between Josephus' description of the Essenes and the rule of the community. All right, so number one, separation from other Jews. I mean, Josephus himself talks about three different groups: Pharisees, Sadducees, and the Essenes. The practice of extreme asceticism, educating children according to their customs. Some have said, well, the Essenes were only a group of men, but we've said that the cemetery seems to argue against that view. Also, you have Essenes who lived in Jerusalem, and then you have Essenes who lived in Qumran, I believe. Low view of women, probably more men than women in the community. Despising riches, collective owning of property. Some have said there's a similarity between the early church in Acts 2 and the Essene community. Regard oil as defilement. They dress in white clothes. They're treasurers in charge of funds. They only replace their clothing when it's worn out. They get up early. They pray at dawn. Practice purification by washing. We saw the mikvaot. They have common meals, the dining room there. A meal is restricted to initiated members there at Qumran. The priest blesses food before the meal. They speak in turn, and they follow the orders of their elders. They are to be masters of their tempers, peace-loving, and zealous students of the ancient writings, which would show in their copying of the biblical scrolls especially. Interest in healing of diseases. There was an initiation period before entering the sect. They had to take an oath when entering the community, refraining from stealing, part of that oath. They were guardians of the names of angels. Interesting. Avoid spitting. Strict observance of the Sabbath, and a strict rule of discipline. Fearless in the face of danger. Some of the sect supposedly could predict the future. They believed in determinism. And obviously, this was the key part. They disagree with the ritual being practiced in the temple in Jerusalem. And we looked at that historical context, the reason, I believe, for the formation of the community at Qumran. Well, some of the information about the community is also found in the Damascus document, and that is why some believe that the group that left, possibly left Jerusalem, went to Damascus before going down to Qumran. And the rule of the congregation. Again, in my paper, you can read about these sectarian writings. The Temple Scroll, the longest of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I noticed, Ian, that that you did your paper on that. Could you just share maybe a couple things that stood out to you from your study of the Temple Scroll?
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. I believe it's in different sections that were kind of put together, and it's actually in pretty good shape. They've actually done like scientific analysis of this thing, and it's actually has fared well because of they actually kind of, it looks like perhaps even kind of took ways to kind of make sure that with some sulfur, some kind of minerals within that they kind of cured the parchment with it. That was pretty interesting. You were talking about Yadin. So Israel Yadin actually was a military general during the 67 war, and he went and raided Rondo's shop because the Temple Scroll which he was dealing with, get this, with a guy who started Jerry Falwell's televangelistic station in Virginia, and he approached Dean, said, "Hey, I got these. I'll sell them to you. You send me $10,000. I'll give you some of it, and then I'll send the rest of it to you." The guy never did, and ended up in Rondo's hands, and so they went and raided him and got the Temple Scroll. It's just phenomenal. So there's a 3-volume set by Dean on the Temple Scroll. It's a really thorough commentary on the text, and even provides the Hebrew of the whole text in print. So it's really cool.
So how does this Temple Scroll? I'm sure you did it because you're doing your study on the temple.
Right.
How did the study of the Temple Scroll for your paper help you a little bit for your paper and your dissertation?
So it was really kind of interesting how they connect, particularly the Qumran community is heavily emphasizing the book of Deuteronomy in this text particularly. And then they get to the temple, the creation of the temple, the Solomonic temple in First Chronicles, right? Again, the idea of true temple. And so therefore you can kind of make these links then also with Ezekiel and this future temple. But and of course Ezekiel relies heavily on the book of Deuteronomy as well. So it's really kind of a fascinating kind of look at how they really kind of picked out particularly the purification aspects and how that affects the community, as you can see within Qumran. So it's really a fascinating thing. And then of course the book of Jubilees, it's believed, just kind of would pick up right where the Temple Scroll would leave off and developing their theology. So yeah, it's really neat.
Well, I'm glad that you had a chance to do something like that, and I'm glad that hopefully it will help you with your dissertation.
Yeah.
Well, let me just mention a book I quoted a few times here in my talk, The Archaeology of Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. I got to hear and meet Jody Magnus in person, and when she presented some of her research, that's when I bought this book, and I recommend it to you. So what is this?
Is that the Gromacki?
It is in Paleo Hebrew. So Yod He Vav He in Paleo Hebrew. Pretty cool, huh? All right, take a 5-minute break, and we come back. Dr. House going to talk a little bit more about the Passion Week and some of the things that he was finishing up from last week. Then we're going to go into some more things for New Testament archaeology tonight. All right, so I'll see you in about 5 minutes. All right, Dr. House, are you there? There he is. He's back.
Let me tell you what happened. A guy sent me a note that said, "Thank you, sweetheart." And I thought, what is, I know the guy. And I said, what is all that about? He said, well, you sent me a note. I don't remember sending him a note, but he said, I think you were your arena. I thought, I don't know. I'm about to teach.
Okay. Okay. So bring up your PowerPoint for your next section here.
Okay, just a second. I'm going to do two. There'll be a short one that deals with the question of that we never got to on the resurrection.
Okay.
I'll talk about the garden tomb. And then the next is the stuff starting with Paul. Actually, it starts with the Temple Mount and the apostles and what happened the day of Pentecost, the baptism,
okay,
sort of moving us up to Paul, on the way all the way up to Greece and so forth.
Fantastic.
Let me get those things up here. Where's this button to push? There it is.
So
there
put
we
it
go.
up on your screen and then hit the share.
Now you don't see anything so far, right?
No, you need to go up to the share button and click on that now.
Let me do that. Share. Okay, and we're going to go and share that right there.
Okay, I can see it now.
All right, and that's the first part, and that's
okay.
Hold it. That's the second part. This is the first part, and that's the second part. So I'm going to put that up right here. Let me see if I do this right. Right here. Okay, Jesus and Archaeology, and I'll talk about this stuff, and then I'll go back to the other.
Okay.
Well, listen, you're going to sit around?
Couple minutes, and then you'll start, okay?
Are you staying around?
Yes, I'm going to be here.
I wanted to ask you about something when chance comes.
Okay.
Is anybody there? Oh, okay.
Hey, Dr. House, I just came back.
Yeah, I just want to ask you a question. Can you see my screen there?
Uh-huh, yeah.
Now, is that big enough, or do I need to go here and make it?
That's big enough. It looks good.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so when I do that, everything looks good, right?
Yeah, it looks really good.
Okay,
cool
good.
graphics. Yeah.
All right, great. I will get to that in a second. Hey man, just in a few days we're going to be together.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
I mean, I'm sort of excited inside now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got your book today on Israel and the land, soft copy. Israel, the land, and the people.
Let me see that. Is that my brand new one I did? I put it together a little differently. I think that, did you just get that from Amazon?
No, I think your wife mailed it. It was
my wife mailed. Okay, well that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put a new cover on a little bit, and I changed a few odds and ends, but it's basically what I've done before. I have some really good people in there, and then I put out my Jesus book again, did a little work on it, and I put Caesarea Philippi in the background, which is really cool looking now. And that's my book on Jesus. And I'm planning on bringing that with me to Israel. Unfortunately, I couldn't get enough here before I leave. But I'm going to, because I've in the past, I've had some of the book companies at Nafghanistan in the north and Galilee, and also the Garden Tomb. I've had them to carry my my books for people come to the country. So I thought I'd take that. Okay. Did you get your luggage tag?
Yes, they were with the book.
With the little guide I put together. Okay. I guess I ought to go ahead and just publish that in a little nice looking, but I had to change a few things based on some changes in Israel. And I'm just starting tours up again. My goodness, I used to do so many every year. In COVID, I just got back from Egypt, and about 4 months later, I was supposed to leave on 3 different tours: Italy, which included Malta and Malta and Miletus, and then I was going to be doing Israel and then Turkey, Greece, and all of them were canceled with COVID. So I haven't done a single thing since on that. So I'm just getting my going again. I never am tired of it.
I'm glad that you don't.
Yeah, we're trying to get ramped up now. I'm putting it together. I got a guy working on it who's very good in computers programs. If are you on a computer right now? Go type up hwhouse.com. I think that's it. Hold on, let me see if that's it. Here we go. I think that's the address. hwhouse.com. Yeah, that will take it. Go to hwhouse.com. This is a new website I'm putting together. Are you there?
Yeah, I see it. Looks great.
But if you just let it be for a second, blogs will go across. I've written about 50. I'm ready to go. I got the Visual Study Bible there. You click that, you go to the Study Bible. And then I've got the one he's working on right now on biblical tours to really make it cool looking. So we're doing some stuff to, I stopped my blogs when in Oregon before I moved here. And Ed Heinzen had written one of my first blogs. Let me show you this to you. Where is that? Come on. Yeah. Right here. See that?
Very nice. Quarantine frenzy.
I'm going to probably put that out. I've got about 50 of these things written. So I've got to cover, I can cover at least a year and a half probably. And, but I'm working on all these different angles. I'm getting ready to get my videos up. I've got tons of those. And so that when a person comes to my site, they can go to individual sites. These are individual sites that all work together as one site.
Yeah, you can almost have your videos as site number 4 in case somebody just wants to watch your videos.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I'm going to have a video section, a section for papers that I will send to people if they want them. Some of my published papers, the tours, the blogs. I privately call this Wayne's World, but I'm taking all the components of things I'm working with, including books and other things. So
you could call. I got one for you. Rooms in the house.
Rooms in the house. I appreciate it. But,
rooms in the house.
But Gary, I'll put up our thing here too.
Yeah.
And we'll have a whole grouping of all these webcast things we're doing. So
fantastic. I think we're ready to get started. So if you want to go now, I think we're ready.
Let me get off this. All right. We'll talk more about that later. I guess it's a little larger, I guess, or it will cover that. Okay. Just tell me when to start.
Go ahead.
Oh, everybody's here?
Yep.
I should be seeing somebody's pictures. Let's see here. Where's that? I can see Steve in there, but I don't see anybody else. How do I get the rest of you guys? Let's see.
I'm seeing everybody on my screen there.
Okay, I don't know why I'm not. Technology leaves me behind. Okay, well, let's just start up. It's good to have you on the class tonight. We're going to do a couple things. One, I'm going to finish off Jesus and archaeology, which I really didn't go into finally, and I want to sort of show you 2 or 3 things. And then we're going to move directly into the whole concept of archaeology and the early church. And I can't cover everything in the kind of time frame we're talking about. So I've picked a few things that I consider some of the biggest ones to discuss, and so we'll do that. But if you look at this, I want to give some perspective now, because I think I talked last time about this. If you look, and can you see my arrow? Everybody sees the arrow? Jesus was arrested somewhere up here on the Mount of Olives, came across the Kidron Valley, and some people believe that he was taken into this area. This would have been where the priests were, the Sadducees. Probably they think there may have been underground things here or whatever. The point is where the Sanhedrin met, and the priests were. And of course, all the various, I think there were 4 or 5 illegal trials during the night by the people. And then they took him to Herod, and Herod is over here, Herod's palace here. And then you have the Antonia Fortress right here. And it's been argued in the past that the Antonia Fortress was the location of a place that was called Lithostrosus, that was a place supposedly that there was a court held with Pilate there at this point. I've always thought it was a problem that Pilate knowing what we know about him and his arrogance, his pomp, being pomp and so forth, the idea that he would have trial at the Roman soldier barracks seems it's a little low to me. So what they've discovered over the years is that this area right here, which is on the other side, remember, this is right here is the eastern wall. This is the western wall. This is south and this is north. So you have to get your perspective. I don't think Jesus went here. I think what happened is that they moved him here and took him down into this area right here. And this is where the activities occurred. And we're going to be looking, guys, the ones that are going to Israel, we're going to be looking right around this area right here because they've discovered steps that actually go into nowhere because there's a wall in front of it, but it's a wall that you have a basis of an early wall and a later wall that probably became an Islamic wall built later, possibly some Crusader wall. But I'm going to try to see if I can't get us on the other side here. We're looking inside here somewhere. I don't know if we can or not. But this would be actually an entrance at the steps into probably, I think, where Pilate was in his judgment area. Because Pilate would have occupied this area right here. He took over the place. So that makes the most sense to me. And so what we find is that instead of the Via Dolorosa, which some of you have seen on my Visual Study Bible, I laid it all out for you, the Via Dolorosa, as well as the Days of Passion. It's all out there to let you know what's going on. What happened instead is I think he came over here. He went through Pilate in this area here. Then he was taken up to what we think of as it was outside the gates. This was built about 6 years after Christ died. So it was outside the city gate, the what we call Golgotha or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and so forth. So that makes the most sense to me. The place that a lot of people believe, and I'm going to talk about it in a moment, is up here called the Garden Tomb. And that's also called Golgotha by those who hold to that view, because there's a ledge that looks like it's a skull. But what people forget when you look at the thing 100 years ago, what it looked like, and you look at today, it doesn't look the same. And I suggest that 2,000 years ago, it didn't look that way either. In other words, it has gained those holes over the time because just too much is happening just in 100 years. Well, let's move on here. So here is the structure to give you a better idea. We're going to go to here, look around, but over here is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. By the way, the Eastern Orthodox call that the Church of the Resurrection. So the Roman Catholic emphasized the death. The Orthodox, they emphasize the resurrection. So a little different view. But up here is the where of the Garden Tomb, and we'll go into that later. I'm not going to spend a lot more time on that, but we're going to take some time to visit in this area because I think that's important archaeologically for us now. That sort of lays it out for you a little bit different, just puts perspective on it. Okay. This is a picture, an aerial shot. It's not mine, but this is the area we're going to go to. You're familiar with being up here because a lot of us have been through the Jaffa Gate and those areas, right? You've been, Gary, right? Is Gary there? Okay, maybe not.
Yeah,
so,
I've been there.
You've been to Jaffa Gate. So this area right here that we're going to go to was controlled by Rome, I think. And so the Jaffa Gate, we're going to go right down to right here where I have some of those pictures that you've seen. This puts it on the map. I mean, an understanding from the model at the Israel Museum. So the difference between where things are. Well, that's the resurrection of Jesus. I just want to briefly talk about now the issue of tombs. It is absolutely clear the difference between a first temple and a second temple tomb. They changed the style dramatically. And this has been verified again and again. What you're looking at here is a place that I actually stayed for a while. I stayed with the monks and the scholars at École Biblique for some time. I enjoyed my visit with these people. I had my own room and ate with them every day. It was really a good time. But this is in a place called École Biblique, and I've made arrangements, hopefully, that on the tour we'll actually go to the site. I've gone there usually every tour I've done, but so I'm hopefully that's going to work out again. But these are all First Temple tombs. By that we mean in the 8th century BC. And so this is what they look like. And people would go in there, they'd be put on these ledges. There'd be 3 to each room. Each one of these is a room. They'll be put on ledges. This has steps even to go to higher. And then the bones would be put underneath the little areas where they were laid on top of. That's another one. You can see it from a different angle from the top now versus the bottom that I showed you. These are the ledges. Here's the place the bones went. So when you see in the Old Testament, and it talks about that the person was gathered to his fathers, it's not talking about going to heaven. It's talking about the second burial. They had a first burial, and then a year later, they always had a second burial. This was practiced all the way through the centuries in First and Second Temple period. But in the First Temple period, they would take the bones after that was a person decayed up here. They laid his head. See the headrest? The headrest went here. The head went here. They laid him here. After a year, the flesh had gone. They took the bones. They put them here. In the Second Temple period, they actually gathered the person and put them in a bone box that we call an ossuary. Here's the garden tomb. And I have a lot of respect for these people. I really like them. They love the Lord. They're trying to win people to Christ. And it's a wonderful place to go and to pray and take communion together and be together as believers. And it's a beautiful setting. But this is, without any question, this is a First Temple tomb. And Jesus was laid in a brand new tomb. And if you look at this, I'm going to show you here. See this wall? This wall is only separated by stones that deep, and they're not deep stones. This butts right up against the First Temple tombs of Ecole Biblique. And you can even go into one of the rooms, and if you were to dig through about 3 yards, you'd be standing inside the garden tomb. So that's how it is. This is about 100 years ago. Don't you see the difference? See this ledge? This ledge here? There once upon a time was something on top of this. And this actually was an opening in the bottom. A person laid up here, and this is where the bones went. They have 3 of these in here. Like all the First Temple tombs, there are always 3 ledges on which people were put. Here's how the wall went. This is a picture from long ago. And you can see that, again, this is a First Temple tomb. Look at this is a current picture of it. I took this 3 years ago, I think. And you can see where the little portion fits. Again, and the place around and the lip of it, there's no question. This is a Second Temple tomb. Now, this is not a well-known tomb, but this is one on the road between Mount Carmel and Tel Megiddo, on the way from Caesarea Maritima. And so this stone, a rolling stone, we're going to go inside. This probably was a tomb from long ago that was made into a storage area, probably. But if you look here, this is a drawing from my son-in-law on how these things were done. See the little niches here? They call the coke, I'm not sure which, in which people were put. It's not putting them on top of anything, but slipping them in these little places. And when they decayed after a year, the second burial, they would put them in an ossuary. Here's the one inside that tomb that's on the way to Tel Megiddo. You can see how it's done. Now, what is this? Notice the same concept. These are tombs, are the sites, the cokes, that the insertion places. These are just a few feet from the garden, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre's edicule, where Christ was probably placed. So Christ was clearly in a tomb area that was a Second Temple 1st century BC tomb. BC. No, it wouldn't be BC, it'd be AD. Okay. There's Irina and me in there. So that just sort of shows you the difference between the first and the Second Temple tomb. It's pretty decisive. But I don't argue with the people of the Garden Tomb.
So-
We go to
Dr. House, for the Second Temple tomb, there was no like hole because they used the ossuary instead. Is that correct?
there was no hole underneath where a person laid. No, because
Okay.
nobody laid on top of anything. There was
Where would they put the ossuary then?
it would be lying inside the tomb area itself.
Okay.
And by the way, and they found many I keep having to say because first temple, second, there are many first century BC AD tombs that have all these little niches in it. And they found lots of ossuaries in the right outside them. This is standard.
Now, are they still have the ossuaries at the near the Garden of Gethsemane? Wasn't there a group of them there? Ossuaries?
I don't know of any real ossuaries outside the Garden Tomb. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I thought I saw a group of them over by that Church of All Nations, but I can't remember.
Well, the Church of All Nations is quite a ways from the Garden Tomb. So
Right.
the
But I'm just saying, just to see the ossuaries themselves. Of course, you have the Caiaphas ossuary there in the Israel Museum.
Yeah, I'll tell you where that is, and we will be going there. As you go down what is called the Pilgrim Walk from the top of the Mount of Olives down to the Garden of Gethsemane, on the way there's a place called let me think. I know what it is. My goodness, my mind just went blank. It's the place of the teardrop of Christ. I can't think of the name. You know it. But it's about halfway down the Pilgrim's Walk, and they have a whole bunch of ossuaries there to look at. So we will see plenty of them. What is that stupid thing called? I can't think of the name of it. It just escapes me. Okay, we'll get that one, close that one up. Now we'll go to the major presentation for the evening, but I wanted to cover that. By the way, we'll probably be having Gabi Berkai to come talk to us. I've been trying to reach him, but usually I can get him and he's around, and he's done a talk for me every season I can remember I've been there. This right here is archaeology and the early church, and there's so much that we could put here that we can't get to it all. I haven't got issues of Laodicea and Hierapolis and Aphrodisias, and I could go to all these Smyrna, on and on and on. There's things that we could talk about that have archaeology. And I've been, for example, at Smyrna, I've got to know the guy who was a major archaeologist there. I've filmed him. We talked. I went down. We translated Greek together. We had a lot of fun down in the tunnels. So I wish we had time to go into everything, but I've just picked certain things I thought would be very interesting for us tonight. And so I've limited the places. Maybe we'll have more time in the future. First of all, I'm starting with Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, because what we think of as the early church, it began in Jerusalem. So I want to cover a few things that relate to the early church at the time of the apostles after Christ had gone back to heaven. And of course, if you look at Luke's statement, he writes it to a man by the name of Theophilus. That seems so plain to me, because I've been reading with people and from a book where the people said that the books were written to the whole world at the time, and that it passed all the way through the ancient world in the first century, and there's no evidence for all that. This was a personal book to Theophilus, which eventually got into the system, I think, as far as people reading it, but it was not actually done for that purpose. But here you have Luke, who says that these are the things Christ did and said, and then, of course, the instructions were given to the apostles, and John 14 and 16 gives some information on that, and what he did and his convincing proofs that he was alive and came back from the dead. You can read the Gospels on those things. And then the Great Commission, as we think of, is sort of given to them very quickly here, not like Matthew 28. But he tells them to wait in Jerusalem until the gift comes. And so that's the first portion of this. And then we find that they were concerned about the kingdom coming immediately. And he said, that's none of your business right now. Go do what I told you. And leave it with God. So that's where we're at now. So when you come to this, you find out the apostles were in Jerusalem, like Jesus said, and there were 11 of them. So one was missing, and Peter makes a point of the fact that Judas was this is not the same Judas here in verse 13, but Judas actually was a betrayer, and they did lots and fell to Matthias, and he became one of the 11. So now you had 12 again. So this is what is viewed as the place of the home of Mary, not Mary Magdalene or Mary the mother of Jesus, but a Mary of James and Joseph, I think is the name. But you can see how this looks. You can't imagine if you go to the streets of Jerusalem and think that thousands of people were in the streets in here, and they could look up and see all these wonderful things going on in the upper room. It's just not a reasonable position. This is a place that they did meet as a small group of the apostles and a few of the mother of Jesus and others like that. But and they had their meetings and prayer and probably stayed and slept on the floor. But this is not where, in my opinion, what we think it was a day of Pentecost occurred. This is not where the apostles preached, or actually Peter himself. This is not where the Spirit fell, as it's sometimes said. It fell instead on what we call the Temple Mount. Now, I want to show you the temple a little bit. Let's get some bearing. Remember, this is, in fact, that's the areas we have. This is the temple with Antonia Fortress, which would be north, the southern gates, eastern gate, and western gate. So we have our perspective. The temple then actually looked toward the Mount of Olives. A lot of things happen here we're going to talk about in a minute. But first of all, I'm going to talk about two arches, and I'm going to go backwards. Can I do that? I hope I can. How did I do that? I want to go back the other way. Oh, good. These are two arches that once were there, and both of these were destroyed in antiquity, particularly the destruction of Jerusalem. What took place, we know from the records, is that, remember Jesus in Matthew 24 when the apostles were saying that, man, weren't those great buildings on the temple? That's what was said. All these buildings on the temple. And Jesus said, not a single stone of these will be remained. So we sometimes think that Jesus said that all the stones of Herod's temple area, the Temple Mount, have to be destroyed. And people wonder why do we have so much of the western wall and the eastern wall and the northern and southern? Well, why? Since Jesus said all the stones will be taken away. No, he said the stones of the buildings they were talking about would no longer be there. And in fact, they aren't. The temple and all the Solomon's portico, as we call it here, this area was all gone. All the other buildings are on top of here were gone, including the temple. So that's what Jesus specifically said. Now you find upper stones here were knocked down by the Romans, but they did not destroy the whole wall, what we call the Western Wall. And today, when you go, you'll find that the bottom portion of this goes back to the 1st century. These were not destroyed. It's only the upper area that actually are gone. And this area right here, if you look along with me on the map or this picture, this area right here at one time was on the same level as this area right here, all the same area. And it used to be when I went to and I probably still do, when I've led tours over the years, I've led so many, but every time I always say we're walking today where Jesus walked, 30 feet above. So he was down there. There's all this buildup ever since. But when we get to here at the tour, and if we study this also, we in fact know that there were shops right here, and they're still there because they dug out all this debris and gigantic stones that were thrown down and so forth here to be at the level of the first century. So now you really today can walk the very steps that Jesus actually walked. I guarantee in all the times he was there, he was over some of those. This right here was destroyed. Apparently, according to Ronnie Rice that I spent the day with, he was the excavator of this, and he and I spent the day together talking about it all and looking around the place together. He said that this was cleaved in two with one swoop, and he wasn't sure exactly how it took place, but he said the evidence seems to be that. And this was destroyed also. So both the locations of these have been found, but in fact, they're no longer there. We're going to see more here in a minute. Here's a great drawing of this that's done by a person by the name of Christine Kidd, who's the one that did it. It's in the private collection of Dr. Randall Price, and I have a shot of it. And this is the former area of what we call the Stoa. Remember, the Greeks also had Stoa. We find that in Athens. And so did they here on the Temple Mount. This was built by a Roman. He wasn't a Roman. He was a Jewish Edomite combination, Herod the Great. But he followed a lot of the practices of the day as far as building buildings. And so this was a major building. And I think it's in this building that we actually have probably the Apostle Peter initially with the apostles. Remember, he was speaking to them when the Spirit came on them, and then the noise occurred and that got attention in the Temple Mount, and then all these things, and then the people started gravitating over there, and the tongues of fire and all these things probably occurred in this area right around here. We'll talk more about that. But this is sort of how it looked. It's pretty good representation based on what we know. Houses out here. This is the northern area moving toward the Antonia Fortress. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. This gives you a broader view of it. Here's a Stoa again. They call it Solomon's Portico. This held thousands of people. When you see how big this is, if you ever go to Israel, hopefully you'll go to Israel with us sometime, but you'll see what I'm talking about. This whole area covered thousands of people on both sides, but inside this area right here, there are openings. And at those openings, they had warnings for any Gentile who entered. It was on pain of death. And we have located two of these. One is found in the museum at Istanbul. And I can't remember, Gary, Dr. Gromacki, you may remember where the other one was, but we have two of them that identified don't come inside. And this was called also the Court of the Women. And the reason why is that Jewish women could come in as well as men, but Jewish women could not go into the next level, which is right over here. Okay. This is the Antonia Fortress over here. You can see. So this is a bridge that goes across. There's evidence for all these things we're looking at in the archaeological work that's been done. This is a southern wall. And you'll notice today, this cuts off right about here, so that you don't go to these steps. This is cut off, and there's actually, the Muslims have everything closed down here, including this, and this isn't here. But on the other side of this, there's evidence of an opening here, and there's evidence of three different doors here. And this is an area that we'll talk about in just a minute. So certain things happened that were important. If you need something, be sure to ask me a question.
You might want to show them where the Western Wall is in relationship to that drawing.
Okay, well, let's see. Let me see if I can go back. The Western Wall, as we think of it, is on the other side of where this bridge is. And it goes all the way down. There's an opening right down here as what is called the Western Wall Tunnel. And you really can't go through there unless you're a rabbi or someone who's an Orthodox Jew. But there are underground ways to go underneath to actually the first century level and walk it. And we will do that if you go on a tour with me sometime. We do that every time. And we come out in the Arab quarter where you actually have the Antonia Fortress right here. We actually go underground just like the people you'll see here in a moment. I'll show you how low that is in just a moment. But the Western Wall's here, people are praying down here, not up here. It's too high. People are praying down here today, and there's an entrance here, but there's also another entrance right over here that goes down underneath the same level as this Western Wall Tunnel. And it actually comes out into the Arab quarter today. And this right here is an Arab school. And it's easy to get permission to do it. I've done it many times. You can actually go inside this Arab school, go upstairs, go to a window right here and look out over the entire Temple Mount from a height, which is sort of interesting to do.
Dr. House, one question. I don't see the mikvahs depicted in the southwestern corner in this particular painting, but do we know about the dating of those mikvahs?
Well,
are in that area?
I don't know if it'd be any different from the time this was probably constructed, I would think. So you don't see them yet, and I'm going to show them to you. But I think probably it's the same time period. I can't imagine. See, because this structure had been pretty well wiped out in the Babylonian time. They came back, with Nehemiah and Zerubbabel, and so the group, Ezra, trying to reconstruct all of this. But it's actually, remember, the original temple was not built on a platform like this with all this grandeur around it. This isn't the original temple. The Solomonic temple is the temple that's the focus, not all the surroundings of the temple. And so you need to understand that. So if you came to the temple of David, or not David, but Solomon, and afterwards before Babylonia, what you had is a wall put up, but you didn't have all this structure. Herod actually leveled the whole structure so that the portions of the mountain, it's on a mountain on top, just like the Greeks, it was on the top of a mountain. And so to one side it would be low, and he built up the level and put stuff in there. And on the other side, it might have been too high, and he cut that off. I mean, he leveled the thing out.
And so it's important to realize too, from John chapter 2, where it says when the Jews said to Jesus, it took 46 years to build the temple. So it wasn't done in a year. 46 years to do this renovation of basically Zerubbabel's temple site. And so if this is if you hold an AD 30 crucifixion, you're talking 20 BC to about AD 26. So that's 46 years, and of course that sort of coincides with Herod. Of course, Herod died. And it would have been others that would have continued his work even after his death. If you place the death of Herod somewhere about 4 BC, you still have a long period of time for the Jews to be rebuilding this second temple.
I'm trying to think when Herod started ruling, because you're right, it was about 4 BC when he died. But he lived a long time there. He's an evil man who lived a long time. But he was great because he was a great builder, not because he was a great guy. Everybody wanted to kill him. But
didn't his rule begin around 46, 47 BC?
Yeah, he started. Yeah, he had a pretty long rule. So, Dr. Gromacki, I think, if you say 4 BC and you go back about 46 years, you're not far removed from it, at least.
Okay, so you think that he completed the work before he died then, so 4 BC?
I would say that, and again, I don't know this for certain, but I think I knew his reign was a very long one, and he died in 4, so I'm thinking he probably got the major structure put together. It may be there was a development, additional, some additions and so forth, but I think that the major structure that we think of was built by Herod.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, when was the mikveh built? I don't know, but I do know that it was in existence, and they have found to my last recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not speaking from notes, I'm just speaking from memory. I believe there were 31 mikveh that they found in the southern area from the steps. And that's
were there any mikveh on top of the Temple Mount itself, or were they all outside the Temple Mount proper?
Outside the Temple Mount, and let me tell you one reason why. Because the mikveh were not built by the Jews for Christian baptism. You had thousands of Jews who came to all the festivals and all these things during the year before they could go in those southern doors that led down and then up onto the Temple Mount. They had to cleanse themselves. And there had to be a lot of water. And they actually, they would go in through they had done all sorts of things getting ready, buying sacrifices, this and that. But before they could go in, they had to actually walk through the mikveh, come up, clean off, put new clothes on, and go in the southern steps. So there had to be there before serious worship occurred.
Do you have any evidence of the portico remnants on the street below? Did the Romans destroy the portico when they destroyed the temple building proper?
Apparently so, because nothing of the portico exists today. The Alaska Mosque is not connected to it. So there were some things underground that we know of, and particularly later, the Crusaders even used it for their horses, which got the name, Solomon's Stables. But they had an underground area that now that you have the underground mosque there, which I, by the way, have pictures of. Had one of my friends go take pictures as a Muslim. And that actually, when you go into the southern steps, if we could do this, and they won't let us do it, but if we had permission, we could actually go into the entrance there, if they opened it up, and go right down into what they call the Alaska Mosque and come up the steps on the other side and go to the right, and it's an opening. So there's a lot of stuff downstairs that we don't get a chance to see. Okay. Any other questions with that? I'm going to show you some more in just a minute about this southern area. Those are good questions, though. Let's move on then. Another picture, I'm just giving you different perspectives of it, but let's go here. This puts it from a different angle. This is right here, the eastern wall. This over here is the western wall of the temple. But over here, this way, if I go this way, I'll come to another big wall, and that is the western wall of the city of Jerusalem. Whereas the temple was part of the eastern wall of the old city of Jerusalem. So this is the portico. I want you to notice the opening here. These are, see the openings here? Those are there because it's viewed that people actually went down underneath here, like I was talking to you about. Okay? And they had rooms. It's a stoa, just like the one in Athens, very close in structure. They had rooms up here that people had, that you probably reserved, I don't know, but people that spent their time in. And I think this is probably where the apostles actually met in a small group. We're not talking about the thousands yet. They met in a small group, and things began to happen that got attention. What? Something sounded like an atomic bomb outside. The roaring of the wind. Everybody began to look, and then they said, "Let's go find out where that is." And the people moved that direction. There would have been thousands of people out here. They moved that direction, and then encountered Peter with this miraculous flames that got attention. And then finally, Peter stood up and spoke to the crowd. To me, that's what occurred, as far as I can tell. Anybody have questions on that? Can you understand the logic of the argument? Okay.
Yes.
Nothing else on that southern wall of the Temple Mount. Let me show you now. This is the area we call the southern wall. And I showed you just a moment ago. Well, I showed you on 2 back. You see that over here on the right? That's what I'm showing you right now here. And what you have all down here below these steps are mikvahs. And they didn't know that initially. This came as the archaeology was done, as the excavation was done. And so that's why I think, there used to be an argument by some that the baptism of 3,000 people could not have occurred in this area. Couldn't have occurred. Because where would you get all the water to do all this baptism? Well, if you got 12 apostles, 3,000 people in a good day's time with 31 mikveh, you can do it. Because they just let them in and let them out, let them in and let them out. That's how they did it. They didn't have ceremonies that we do are much more, restricted. I mean, you have, you take time with it, and you have the baptism, and you have the sermon. You have I think they're baptizing people here like John did in the River Jordan. This is an example of one. And there I am in another, just to give you the idea of height. I'm about 5'8", so that's about, maybe about almost 6 foot tall. Here's another one from another angle. There's two together. They're all over the place. Okay, well, I'm going to move from that. I hope at least some of this gives you some ideas about at least my thoughts on how archaeology helps us to understand what occurred on the day of Pentecost. To me, it makes sense. I'm willing to be, taken to a task if you can demonstrate something else, but to me, this makes sense. This is looking at the temple, a drawing I found, I picked up to give you an idea of the city, but you can see some of the same things. Some of these are constructed a little differently. Maybe how close the temple is to this may be destructed, but this is looking at the wall. The wall of the temple goes on with the wall of the city of Jerusalem here. This is a picture I picked up somewhere. This was a bad time day. Romans coming in. Wow. Yeah. Now let's talk about the south eastern wall. Again, here gives you another view. Shows you a little bit more. This is where the steps are. This is, on the other hand, on the other side, on the western wall, on the south portion of it. And if you'll notice, the rocks here, this is only a left. The archaeologists left these there purposely to let people see what it looked like. But actually, these rocks you're looking at here were all the way down here to the end. It was packed full of rocks all the way up and down, higher and longer. You with me? This is just to show you what it was. They left a remnant to do that. And this right here are rocks closer, but they were here too. This is where, in fact, the Robinson's Arch fell. And Ronnie Rice told me that they can't figure out exactly how the Romans were able to do it, but it wasn't taken down little by little. They actually clave it in two in one whack. So I don't know how they did that. And he said, I don't know how either. But this right here now, these, you can actually, if you walk on these steps, you can say, I don't have any question that Jesus walked in this area at this point in the first century. You're walking the steps of Jesus and the apostles and a lot of other people. But these are, if you go to the city of Jerusalem and get into the inner city, you have all these people selling things up and down the way, and they're all selling about the same thing, and there is no price on anything, because what the price is how much they can convince you to buy it for. That's the price. But in the days of Jesus, you also had businesses like this. These are little businesses just like today. And there were businesses on this side, and people walked between the two to buy doves and whatever else they were buying, exchange money. You had to buy a temple coin. You couldn't just take any coin and give it to the temple. You had to buy a temple coin. So that's what you see. But notice something else. This one right here, Professor Rice told me that they found a little key to a door here. I thought that was such an intriguing little thing to add, that you know how people leave their keys someplace under a rock or under this or that. And this was a wooden door, probably, and they had a key to open it with right here. I thought that was sort of intriguing. This right here, if you'll notice, this goes up, 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 up until you get to the same level as what we think of as a Western Wall area. Again, another look at, you know, the destruction that took place. Robinson's Arch is right above this. Oh, there's Ronnie Reich. He's there. I actually got a picture of myself lying on these, but I wouldn't show that picture to you. I was acting like I got crushed for fun. But it was no fun for people in those days. But these are the rocks. Those are gigantic rocks. The Crusader rocks, the Islamic rocks are really fairly small, but the Herodian rocks are gigantic. Many of them are amazing. I think and help me on, Dr. Gromacki, if you know different, but if my memory serves me correctly, the largest stones on the pyramids were about 3,000 pounds. And yet they have rocks that are on the Temple Mount of the building that are like something like 700, either 700 tons or 700,000. In other words, they're enormously bigger than anything found on the pyramids in Egypt.
I think the largest one, if I remember right, when you go in that tunnel by the Western Wall, there is a stone inside there that's just absolutely huge.
Yeah, it's gigantic, and you couldn't, you know, here's the issue, and I have some explanation for you if you have interest about it, because again, I had the privilege of spending the day with him as he explained everything they found. I wish I could remember everything that he talked about, but how do they move these gigantic stones without mountain? And not only that, how did they get them from the ground to the top of the wall as they built it? How do you do that without modern technology? That would even be hard now. And they have examples of how they think it occurred. And I have a picture myself right next to one of these as if I'm moving something. But they move these up the hill from Solomon's quarries. If you can go inside there, I've been in there a couple times, and they carved out underneath the city. They carved out these stones, put them on these slabs that pulled them out. They put them inside these large wheels where they were in between, and they rolled them up the hill, and they got them here. And then they understood the idea of who's the guy that said, you know, if you have the something or other, you can raise the world or something. What was that?
A lever long enough. If I had a lever long enough, I can move the world. I can't remember his name though, but yeah. Yeah, but anyway, they proved it to be true, at least in part. So it's an enormous activity that took place. Herod, of course, he had all the help he needed to get it done. Well, let's talk about Caesarea Maritima, unless you have a question on what I've said so far. Dr. Gromacki, I want to be sure I understand. Do I have the rest of the time till we close tonight, or you want to do more?
I'll just let you teach, and then if I see something I can add, I'll just go ahead, keep going.
Okay, well, feel free to do so if you need to. Caesarea by the Sea, Maritima. There are two Caesareas. They're both named after Caesar. Now, why would a king building these locations in the country name them after Caesar? They were always courting the Roman Empire. Caesarea are for Caesar, Maritima by the sea. A lot of people don't understand that Pilate, Herod, and all these guys, they did not spend a lot of time up in Jerusalem. It's just when they went up there, they wanted to have nice accommodations, and so they had the beautiful palaces. But they spent most of their time down by the ocean enjoying it, just like probably many of us would if we had an opportunity to move from a hot area up on the hills of Jerusalem. That's the hottest in the area, pretty well. No, I take that back. I'm saying that wrong. It's just the opposite. But nonetheless, it's because the desert's the hottest. but you have the city, nonetheless, it's up there on the top of the hills in Jerusalem, over against being by the ocean, which you have here. This right here, by the way, is viewed as the judgment area that Paul would have appeared before Felix, before Festus, before King Agrippa II. This would be the area that he would have been judged in. This is considered the judgment hall. This is a theater. What is the difference between a theater and an amphitheater? Anybody know?
An amphitheater goes all the way around.
Correct. And we call amphitheaters
Stadiums.
Coliseums, yeah. So this is a theater, but every city where you have Roman Greek influence, I guess, I've never seen one without it, throughout the empire, every city had a theater. Some, like Laodicea, had 2 theaters. And they had to be dug out in the recent years, but they did find 2. They always wanted a place to enjoy themselves. And so that's here what you have, a theater at Caesarea Maritima. This is a look at from the where I showed you the judgment seat, looking out toward the area. If you look to the left, that's viewed as the area probably that the prison that Paul spent time in while he was waiting for final judgment. That was a couple-year period, and it was a beautiful area. I'm just showing you just a small piece of it here. This is the public bath, and this is right. This obviously is by the Mediterranean Sea, and at one time that was filled with water. It was in better shape, obviously, and the palace is, as you're sitting looking at it, the palace is behind you, so to speak. That's where it is. This is an example of the palace. The public bath was down there. This was where the palace was. By the way, I think I'll be showing it to you. The inscription they found of Pontius Pilate was found in the theater in a stair that people had. They weren't paying a lot of attention in the initial days. They didn't think about museums and people wanting inscriptions. But one of the steps was underneath was actually an inscription that identified Pontius Pilate at the time of Tiberius, who was what in the King James, I think they called it procurator, but nonetheless the prefect of this area. But that's
interesting. I have the book that I picked up from Caesarea, and it says this was a dedicatory inscription on the stone. As you said, it was found in the theater, and it says Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, has dedicated to the people of Caesarea a temple in honor of Tiberius. So there's a couple interesting historical notes here. You have Pilate's name, which is confirmation, extra biblical confirmation of his historicity. Prefect of Judea versus procurator. It's interesting, he uses prefect.
yeah.
And then Tiberius, who was the Caesar when Jesus died on the cross. So again, we have something found by archaeology that confirms the statements found in the Gospels.
This is a very unusual finding. You're right, Dr. Gromacki, because you have all the information you need. The emperor, that tells you the time, the office, which agrees with the biblical text and his authority and his name. Although I've looked at the actual stone there, and I have never seen that much writing on it. So I'm not sure how they picked up all that other information, and I'm not saying it's not somewhere, but it wasn't on the stone. I've looked at it. It's all in Latin, by the way.
And that stone is found in the Israel Museum. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. They have a replica at Caesarea Maritima now, but the actual stone's in the Israel Museum, and you'll be able to look at it. I've looked at it many times, and you can take pictures of it, and you'll see what I'm saying. when you look at that. There's not that much writing there, so I'm not sure where they all got all the writing. But the fact is that it was in the theater and it was in a staircase, and the people who put it there years and years ago, it was not relevant to them. They didn't see the importance of it. It's just like what happened at Tel Dan. Remember at Tel Dan, the actual inscription was when one of the helpers of Avraham Biren was walking near the gate area of Tel Dan, and she kicked over a stone and saw an inscription, and all of a sudden they said, "Uh-oh, look at the stones around you." Because when you see an inscription, that's the most important thing you can get. They found the rest of it in a wall that's across the way behind about where they have that little high place now if you go there in Tel Dan. People didn't care in those days about inscriptions. I mean, that's another age as far as they're concerned. We are concerned about getting it in a museum. They didn't care. But it was found, and in fact, in the theater, that's correct. And it did have that information on it, that those 3 points I talked to you about, or I mentioned. I got to find out if that really is somewhere else. I don't know where they got all that info. We should look that up, because that's a lot more good information. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah, it's interesting because I agree with you. When you look at it itself, it's hard to read all of that on there. Maybe they're just taking a guess on that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
This is from the official book that was given there.
Yeah, maybe they found it. I don't know where they got that, because I've looked at this several times and read on it. As a matter of fact, I've written on it.
Aren't they just filling in partial words? So some of it is somewhat assumption, but it's probably pretty accurate.
I think they probably the people who wrote this probably knew that the way it was constructed with the emperor and the person and the office, that it was a dedicatory stone. I think they figured that out.
Was that, you said the stone was found in the theater, but according to this translation, it's dedicating a temple to Tiberius. So did they find a temple to the Roman emperor there?
There's a difference between where it's found here and what it was dedicated to at its original time it was done. This stone was put there not because it had no significance other than being a good staircase. People couldn't care less. They didn't know. The people who did this, we don't know who they were, but the people who put that in there before it was found, to them was another stone like off the ground. Now, its origination may have been this dedication thing. That makes sense. In other words, they had something that mentioned him for some reason. So I'd say, yeah, I'd go with it's probably for that purpose. And it was another location than where it was found by the archaeologist. You understand, it was not in situ, it was in another place. So I think they put that together somewhat, but I just don't remember that you could have that much information on that stone. Maybe I'm wrong, but we can look at it again when we're together. Okay, let's continue on. Here's the palace again. I showed you that. Here's looking at the hippodrome to your right. Hippodrome is a horse racing place. And unlike, I don't know, I think originally, if I remember correctly, there actually were, before the sea sort of took it all out, I think there were actually bleachers, as we might call them, on both sides of the hippodrome here. I think that's correct. But at least we have the one here that's very obvious, and the sea never had that much impact on it. But this is the hippodrome.
Did they have races like Ben-Hur with horses and a chariot and a rider?
They did, except that in Ben-Hur you were doing it in Rome, and there was far more room to run your horses. You got to think about the size of the chariots and the horses and everything in Ben-Hur. They couldn't have run one at a time down this thing. I think have you ever been to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo?
Have not. I've seen pictures. I've been seeing pictures of the chariots, though.
I take groups to Egypt also. Remember that. Right before COVID, I just came back with a group. But when you go into the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, they have an Egyptian chariot. We think about the chariots that went into the ocean or the sea and were swallowed by the water, right? Okay. Look at those chariots. They're not much wider than, my goodness, my desk. You know, they weren't that big. So the fact is, we have an exaggeration, I think, and so people probably ran down here, and there was room with those chariots, but not with these big chariots we think about Ben-Hur. I don't see it. Okay, let's look at Syria a little bit. Again, I'm more dealing with issues relating to the early church, or I would go deal with Caesarea Philippi and some of those. I've already done that. Here's the only thing I'm going to show you much in Damascus. Damascus is in Syria, and this is the gate of the original street called Straight. And remember that Paul was told to go to the street called Straight, and here it is. And some of it has been reconstructed in a drawing, and I'll show that to you. This right here. See the difference? So at one time, there was a lot more brick around, but this is sort of how it looked probably originally. But see how straight it is? And so Paul went down this area. Here's a view of the street called Straight. Of course, over time, it probably, buildings protruded through it. Maybe it wasn't as straight. But that's about, we don't really have a lot of stuff from Damascus, to my knowledge, archaeologically, but at least that's one thing to give us some understanding. Cyprus is sort of amazing to me. This is really a great find, that you have this little story. I mean, it's not like the grandeur of the Temple Mount, but you got this little story of Paul and the governor getting together, and the magician, who's a Jewish magician, that Paul strikes, says, basically be blind. And the guy sort of wandered away. And you have this Roman governor who becomes a believer. That's a phenomenal story in the book of Acts to throw in there. And of all things, they actually found his name. And this is Sergius Paulus in his position. This was in Cyprus. So, I'm amazed. Some people, you have a group called minimalists. You know the term, we've talked about it, who they won't believe anything the Bible has unless they can find it themselves. And if they can find some kind of evidence somewhere that's strong enough, they say, well, there's another place the Bible is right, but most of the rest is wrong. And they just keep, I always say archaeology is finally catching up with the Bible because the Bible tells the facts about it, the truth, and then archaeologists gradually continue to find evidence, but they never get to the point that they'll say, well, the Bible is a historically accurate book. It's always mythical until they find something. We're going to have next year, I'm just mentioning this, and I say that for this reason. Next year at the convention that we have in Albuquerque, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, I think it's of September, Finkelstein from Israel will be the major speaker. Finkelstein is the king of minimalists. He's got a tremendous reputation, a well-respected scholar among those who are archaeologists. And he's this kind of guy. If you can ever find any evidence, I'll say it's true. Other than that, the Bible's wrong. I tell you. Anyway, but you put that on your calendar. I said that deliberately because we're going to it because it's really a good conference. I've been to one before in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But here's Sergius Paulus here, evidence of just a little statement that the Bible talks about, and yet you have proof. What about Tarsus? Now, I have been to Tarsus, and I wasn't impressed. Of course, I went with a guy that I don't think he knew much about anything to do with the Bible. I was given a guide when I went to Antioch and Tarsus and some of those places I won't go into the details, but I was given a guide that barely spoke English and didn't know anything much about the biblical text. and he took me to a place where I could look at some murals on the wall, and I thought, this is it? I mean, I spent money to come over here. I flew in here to see the area, you know, that goes to the Antioch and all these places. They call it Antakya. And he didn't show me anything much. But this was there, and I never got to see this and walk it. I want to go back. But if you look here, this is the road to Tarsus. And so I've actually got a big picture of this also, where you go through this. But this is one of the Roman roads that built. Roman roads were, I've got a road outside of my house here that I'm thinking about running for mayor of the city, where I could get some attention to get my road fixed, because it's just full of potholes. Every time I drive out, I think I'm going to break my tires. And Roman roads lasted, whereas roads today don't last very long at all. But this is a great road in Tarsus. That's about all there is. I mean, here's another thing that talks about Tarsus from the 1st century. But there's not much to see at Tarsus. There's not much to talk about, at least as far as I could tell. This is a great, great site. Now, this is not archaeology. This is structure that came from volcanic eruptions, I believe. But it covers about 100 miles. But the importance of it is partly the fact that in Acts chapter 2, if you go to my study Bible, all of you who use the House Visual Study Bible, you'll notice when you go to Acts chapter 2, you have mentioned the fact that there are people right here. Can you see this? Can you see that? These are the places that people came from to the day of Pentecost, and one is Cappadocia, right here. Well, if you click this, you'd find here are the maps of these things, a site study on Cappadocia. There it is. I've got all sorts of pictures on Cappadocia that I'll not go into, but I just wanted you to see that because I'm trying to cover everything that's in the text. But I'm standing right in front of a few, and there are hundreds of these things. These things spewed out, and they form stones historically, and churches are built inside these cones, like little. What are these guys in Lord of the Rings? The little small guys.
Hobbits.
Hobbits.
These are hobbit homes. See the HH, hobbit home. This is actually inside one of the hobbit homes. We're going to call it. I don't know what else to call it. But people lived in these things, and they also had churches in these things. And this is inside one of the churches, just a portion of the inside. Isn't that gorgeous? And this is done by Christians in the early centuries of the church, in these little places that people built homes in and built churches in. This is Cappadocia, mentioned in Acts chapter 2. That's wonderful art. I've seen so much of this in this. This, by the way, is looking over the portion of these places in the area of Cappadocia. They have balloon rides you can go to if you want to. This is, again, more of it. It goes for about 100 miles in Turkey. And there are more balloons if you like balloons. You have to be up at 5 o'clock to get on them, though. And they take you all over this area here. It's just gorgeous. In this same area, though, not too far from here, there's something important. Christians in the time of the Roman persecution. Let me mention something to you first of all. Pliny the Younger wrote a letter to the Emperor Trajan in which he complained that this new superstition that had invaded Asia Minor was becoming a great threat because the temples are being forsaken. Christianity was growing so fast where Paul and John and all these guys were, that people were forsaking the temples and embracing Christianity. And one of the things they did, they lived in places like this, or they had churches like this, but they also, oh, I don't have it here. I thought I put it in. Okay, I'm sorry. They have underground cities. They just found a third one recently, but they had underground cities where Christians actually went into the ground, and they go deep into the ground, and they cut it out, and they lived away from the Roman persecution. And they had big rocks against the places where they were. It's fascinating to see the kind of things that Christians went through. And this is fascinating material to me. And it's mentioned in the Bible. There's probably no city that has been given more attention by archaeologists historically than Ephesus. I can't think of one, other than maybe Jerusalem. But even then, it wasn't that much over the centuries, because it was pretty well, most of its structures were retained. But Ephesus has had archaeologists from I don't know how many universities. And it's a gorgeous site. It's a wonderful site to see. One of the major sites here is what is known as the Library of Celsus, and it's one of the most spectacular things about the site. But you have to understand that this library was built probably sometime in the 2nd century, not the 1st century, the Christian era, not when Paul was there. But there's some gorgeous stuff here, and some of the temples to Trajan and various Roman emperors. You can go on down and keep walking it. There's a lot of things I could talk to you about here, but just want to give you a view of it. This right here is the area of Diocletian. Oh, hold on, where did I do that? Oh, there it is. It keeps going away. This, boy, I don't know why. This was a temple to Diocletian. Does anybody remember about Diocletian at all? He was a very, very bad Roman emperor, and causing the church trouble. But they have temples to different Roman emperors. This is looking toward the bay. At one time, Ephesus was actually on the coast of the Mediterranean. And earthquakes that occurred caused the change in the water and the land. And now, if you go to the edge of this, where it used to have the column that would have represented the end of the road before the water, that's 10 miles away now. So Ephesus actually has had a receding of the Mediterranean about 10 miles here, but this goes toward that area. If you walk down this way here, just a little ways, and turn right and go right over here, you go to the Third Council of the Church at 431. Anybody can tell me what happened in 431 at the Church of St. Mary at Ephesus? Okay, well, 430.
Is that Mary? Is that Theotokos? Is she the bearer of God?
Correct. The bearer. That's where Theotokos started, the one who bears God. But what they meant was that Mary, a human being, actually bore the human Christ, whose person is also the divine being. It said that there is in the Trinity, remember, which occurred later, they said that there's one nature in which you have three persons and one nature. At 431, they dealt with a heresy that argued that there was two natures and two persons.
Nestorianism.
Yeah, right. And then the other was that there was one nature and one person. And so what they came up with at this council in 431, and the church is still there. You can go in and look at it. They argued that there is one person in two natures. fully God, fully human. Very important council, 431. So anyway, it's just right down the road. This is looking around Ephesus a little bit. That's, anybody know what 2K means? Anybody know what Nikkei means? You buy Nikes, or what does that refer to?
Victory.
Victory. Yeah. And so you have these various ones. This is on luck. Good luck. Now, this is an interesting structure. Notice, anybody know what this is?
Menorah?
A menorah. What would that indicate to us?
Jewish settlers in the region?
That's right. There was a Jewish religious community at Ephesus. Where did Paul go? The first place he went, every city he went to in Asia Minor?
The synagogue.
Synagogue.
To reason with the Jews.
Yeah, because he was first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles, right? And so he always went into the synagogue and preached before he turned to the Gentile community. So you have proof here. When you have a menorah, that indicates there was Jewish influence of some sort there. I found this at Laodicea once upon a time before they did any excavation there to speak of. I was at Laodicea. Matter of fact, when you couldn't see anything but grass, and finally they dug a little bit, and they had a column they found very early in the excavation, and I looked at it and I saw that it had the symbol of the cross and the menorah together, which indicated you had a Jewish Christian community. This doesn't indicate a Jewish Christian, but Laodicea had that. So you sort of pay attention to these kind of things because you have to figure people actually put these on there for a reason. This is one of the depictions of the god Artemis, also called in Latin Diana. Artemis is Greek. What is the other depiction of Artemis? Anybody know? A huntress with a deer. She had two different representations in Greek thought. One is that she was the great female huntress hunting, in the wild. The other is this one here, where she was the many-breasted one, demonstrating sufficiency for the city. All these cities had sort of favorite gods or goddesses that were over the city. The god over Athens was a goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom. The goddess of Ephesus was Artemis, the god who provided for her people, and the many-breasted one to depict that idea. This is the Temple of Trajan. Not much to it anymore, but some leftovers. This is a great theater at Ephesus. Anybody know what happened in Ephesus one night when Paul was there?
A riot?
A riot. What was a riot about?
Demetrius and the maker of silver things, kind of instigating it.
Yeah. Okay. And so remember that what did they do for 2 hours? They kept yelling out. I mean, for 2 hours, these people are intense. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. For 2 hours, the text says. So they got exercised quite a bit. But this is a theater, holds 24,000 people approximately. That's amazing. What's the difference here, you archaeologists paying attention here? What's the difference between a Roman theater and a Greek theater? How did they do them differently?
Was the Greek theater like a half circle, and the Roman theater was all the way around?
No, that's a Colosseum. That's not a distinction. The difference between the two, good guess at that. The Greek theaters are all built into the natural landscape of the land. You'll notice the roundness of this hill here. Every place you find a Greek theater, like in Laodicea, when I went to Laodicea back in the 90s, there was nothing there but grass. You didn't see anything look like archaeology at all. And I asked the guide, because he took me and a couple of friends, I said, where is the city? It's right there. I said, I don't see it. And so I went to explore a little bit, and I noticed a curved portion of land there. And I went over and I started looking around and kicking, and I found underneath the grass stone. They eventually found a theater there and one next to it. But they always built it into the landscape. The Roman theaters are built on structures that they build as stone underneath it that holds it up. So the Romans didn't use the Greek model. They actually built arches and so forth that held the weight of the theater up. That's what you'll find that's what you'll find at Caesarea Maritima. You find a Roman style theater, unlike the Greek. That understandable? Just little things to know about what you're looking at when you look at archaeological materials in the ancient world. You'll never guess what this is. Every Greek and Roman city has one of these.
And tell me why Buc-ee's is better.
They're the best restrooms in the world.
That's right. That is right. We stopped there on the way to Colorado just to tell Texas bye.
It's because each one has their own separate room. There's no public restroom.
And they are cleaned constantly, and they're maintained phenomenally. They're big, and I went to the manager of the Buc-ee's in outside of Houston that we stop at all the time, and I walked up and said, I just want you to know, I mean, I like Buc-ee's for many, many reasons, but you have the best restrooms in the world, and I've been all over the world. These are the best. A+. Well, these are found in every single city in the Roman Empire. I could point them out to you. These are at Ephesus. The difference in this one and the one, for example, at the place called Hierapolis, not Hierapolis, I got to go back and get my ideas straight. The difference between this one and the city called Scythopolis, which is called Bet-Shean also, a Greek city, one of the cities of the Decapolis, and many other places I've been where they have restrooms in the ancient world. The difference between this one and all the other ones I've seen is that this one, if you go to it, you find that there is in the middle of it, these seats surround on three sides a area in the middle where you had a group of slaves who played like an orchestra for people. So people would go to the public restroom here. These were only men, I think. I don't think women did. But men here, and they had people in there playing music for you. It's just like the theater. It's like Buc-ee's because they have music in the background too. It's amusing. I won't go into all the things about the Greek and Roman restrooms, but there it is. Okay. This actually is on one of the streets that lead to the theater right near by the public agora marketplace on the way to the theater, which is on the right. This is near the Celsus Library, and this is a game that they played in Ephesus on the street. You find games like this several places in the Roman world. This is an example. There are others that are different. They actually would put these games on the street. Apparently, people used them to play with. Maybe they, like dice or something, where you throw. It was a way that you created your game. It's not as sophisticated as what we have, but it's how they did it. There's another thing carved on the road on the way to the theater from the Celsus Library on that big street that I didn't put here because they have inscribed where to find the local house of ill repute. And they make it clear what it is. So I'll not go into that one. What you're seeing here, just to let you know, is up here are a bunch of homes. right here, there's a street that goes up, we've looked at a couple times already. It goes all the way up to the entrance of the city. Here's the Celsus Library, which obviously was more complete than it looks now, but at one time had hundreds of scrolls, of very important scrolls. Unfortunately, we don't have those now. But this area right here is the public agora. And right here was the road that goes all the way to what used to be the end of the street to the ocean, or to the Mediterranean Sea. If you're walking down this way, right over here is where I had that game inscribed on the street. And you keep walking here, and you'll come to the theater, and that's what you encounter on the right. So that gives you just a sense of where things are. I'm going to show you something in just a minute so you'll understand. Very few people get this, and I've been very fortunate. 2 or 3 times I've gotten permission to take small groups up there, but they don't let too many people in. But right here is the buildings. That there's some very interesting building here. But if you actually walk some stairs and walk up this area right here, you go up here and you walk up the mountain to right around here somewhere, and there's a cave. And inside that cave are some wonderful murals and some frescoes and so forth there. And what they have is this in there. This is the oldest painting of the Apostle Paul ever found. And this is Paul. If you'll notice, it has Palos in Greek. And then you have the word Theot. Can you see that? Theotokos? No, not Theotokos. It's the
Thecla.
Thecla. That's what I want to say. Get all these words going. It has Thecla, and there's a 2nd century work called the Acts of Paul and Thecla. You can read it. And so that's Thecla. This is Paul, and there's wondering who this is, and it's suggested sometimes that this was Mary, because there's a house of Mary that's up the mountain the other direction that people go to oftentimes. But there's not a lot of evidence that is in fact where Mary lived. But we do know that John, under the writings of the church fathers, John took Mary to Ephesus to live, and that's where he operated from, and from which you had people like Papias from Hierapolis, Polycarp, from places like Smyrna and so forth, close to Ephesus. John operated here, but this is Paul. There I am standing at the beginning. This, by the way, is just so you'll know, I didn't put the picture of me here like Samson in the temple, but this is called the Arch of Hercules. And I was trying to demonstrate my strength, but I didn't put it in for you. Okay. Now to Miletus. Now, a lot of people don't go to Miletus, but if you go to Asia Minor with me, you'll always go to Miletus. It is one of the most interesting sites of all. After Ephesus, it's just down the street south. Paul, in the book of Acts, one time mentioned about the fact that the elders were to come to meet him from Ephesus to Miletus, rather than him go by Ephesus. Okay? And so there's some really great stuff there. There's now a great Miletus museum. But they also have other things like public baths, an entire city, sort of like the downtown area that's been submerged somewhat. It's not up like it normally would be. And when it rains, it sort of fills up a little bit. But it has some great stuff. This is, in fact, the public bath at Miletus. It's very well structured. See the guy there? He's been sitting there for a long time. And then you have the water you go into, and people love their public baths. You find them at Sardis, you find them everywhere in the ancient world. Here's what you'll always find in Roman and Greek cities. You'll find a public bath, and you'll find you'll find obviously the restrooms, and you'll find a theater. Well, they had certain things they always had. So here I am standing there, and this is Miletus. It's quite interesting. This is a theater, but this is a far away picture. I want to get closer in just a minute. This gives you the width of it, sort of gives you perspective. Right here, as you go in this area, right up in this area, I saw inscribed on the wall something quite interesting. And then there's another inscription that you walk up this way. I actually videoed this so people, they could look at it and know how to find it. You walk up these steps right here, wherever it is. Okay, there it is. Walk up these steps right here, and right over here, there's something very special I'm going to show you. And there was a time that Sir William Ramsay was a brilliant archaeologist. He was a classical archaeologist, and he spent a lot of time in the Mediterranean world. And he had a Christian man that actually worked with him. And scholars had said at that period of time that Luke was not a very knowledgeable and reliable person in his book, the Book of Acts, because he had all sorts of things that scholars had not yet found. And so they didn't exist, obviously, if they hadn't found them. What happened? The same thing at Tusha, the Hittites and all these other, the same. Scholars can be so arrogant about scripture sometimes. They hadn't found them, so they didn't exist. So what happened is that you can go right inside this little place here, and you find on the wall inscribed, you have to be able to read Greek to read it, but you'll find a reference to a term for city fathers as we would think of it. Okay? And they found now another one at Ephesus, and they have found one here, and there's also one at Aphrodisias. You have what are known as the Polytarchs, like the city fathers. And so you find that here, Luke knew what he was talking about. He used the terms that archaeologists hadn't discovered, but he knew what he was doing because he's reliable. And then what you have is right up here, you have an inscription on the steps. Now, this is interesting because if you go look around all these various places in this theater, just go all the way around, this is a lot of room, you'll find more than this example about different people. But this one right here that I'm going to show you says something that actually confirms the existence of what we call in the Acts repeatedly the God-fearers. Can anybody name for me an early God-fear in the book of Acts?
Cornelius?
Cornelius, yes. He's called a God-fearer. You find also one in Luke's gospel in the ministry of Jesus at some place. Anybody know where that is? I mentioned Luke, the writer, the somewhat classically trained scholar. At Capernaum, his servant was sick. And he came to Jesus very mildly. He said, I wouldn't expect you to come to my house, but my servant is sick. And the Jews said, please help him. He built our synagogue and loves our people. Interesting, huh? Romans who are seeming to be attracted to the Jewish faith, which later happens with Cornelius before Peter comes down to Joppa. You sort of put all this stuff together, see, and I'm going to show it to you now. In this theater, right up in this area here, you find this inscription. Anybody who can read enough Greek to figure that out? Give me the first word. This substantiates Luke's credibility in the Polytarch and all the other examples of words he uses about things. This says topos, which means the place. This is reserved seating in the theater at Miletus. They have it inscribed on the chairs, reserving it for certain people. There is actually other references in the theater to other things. This says topos eundeon, okay, which is a word that refers to, in Greek, you'll find this at Corinth. It means Jew, refers to the Jews. Eudion, tone, which is a article.
Genitive article.
Yeah, article, tone, to agree with this. And then it says kai theosabios. Anybody know what kai means? And theos is what?
God.
God. Theosabios. Ones who are
Fear.
Holy.
Huh?
Fear. Those who fear. Fear
Who
God.
fear God. Who fear God. So here you have the place of the Jews, and either you have to translate the Jews who are also the God-fearers, or you have to translate it the place of the Jews and of also the God-fearers. There's a question as to how you translate it. But you clearly have the word there. And you clearly have the Jews mentioned. So this is an example of the God-fearers. And there are other examples of this at other places in Asia Minor. Here's another shot of it I took. Here's that example I gave you before. Remember I talked about the arches and the polytarchs and so forth? This is what you have in the theater at Miletus again. The arche, which means a ruler. Sometimes it means beginning, but it's here a ruler. Okay. Well, let's look at Greece. How are we doing on time? Okay. At Greece,
we're down to last 15 minutes.
Okay, I'll get you in there. There's so much great stuff, and I hope I'm not taking up all the time and you wanted some. I'll stop if you want me to.
Well, let me, since I have about 15 minutes, I just want to go back to Israel, since that's where we're headed this weekend. Let me share my screen here with you guys. Everybody see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to go through a few more things with Israel that I'm not sure if you covered these or not, but I just want to go quickly through these since we're down to the last 15 minutes. Here's the model of the second temple he was showing you earlier with the fortress of Antonia. And here's a good picture of the triple gate with the steps leading from the southern part of the Temple Mount there. And the mikveh, of course, on the outside of the Temple Mount. Here's an example, a mikveh below the triple gate there. And here's the western wall with some of the Herodian stones. And as you look at the western wall, if you go through the tunnel to the left, you come to the place, which I remember when our guide was there, says this is closest place to the Holy of Holies. Of course, we know that that was in the temple building proper. The trumpeting inscription stone indicates that there was a place that called the people to worship. And there's the remnants of the Robinson's art. He showed us the picture of that. One of the major ways that people got up on the Temple Mount through those steps. Herod, as you know, renovated the second temple. He also had a palace in Jericho. And probably one of his greatest palaces, Masada. Someone has said that he built these palaces as sort of escape routes in case he had to leave Jerusalem. Just shows a little bit of his fear motivating his building. I don't know. Did you show the picture of the aqueduct? I don't remember.
No.
There's a huge Roman aqueduct that brought water to the city. Here's another man-made mountain made by Herod called the Rhodium. The sarcophagus, I believe, of Herod was found along the side there, archaeologist Netzer. And is that sarcophagus now in the Israel Museum? Do you know?
Yeah, well, yes, that is there. But what is oftentimes not understood here, Ehud Netzer, I want to say this. I was with him one time, a wonderful guy. He spent 30 years looking for this. And right before the dedication of it, scaffolding gave way and he fell off and died. But a week before. But this is one of the great events of Herod. He actually had them to cut off the top of a mountain next to it and move it over the Rhodium because he didn't think it was high enough.
And there's the palace at the top, which is quite fascinating. And there is a tunnel underneath. I didn't go through that, but my son Gavin did.
Yeah.
Sepphoris. Anybody know where Sepphoris is located? It's near Nazareth. And so there's the belief that because Jesus was a carpenter, many people think that just involved being a wood worker. But some have said that he might have been more of a stone type mason as well. Yeah. And so Sepphoris is a Roman city, possibly where Jesus worked. Here's the famous Mona Lisa of Galilee mosaic was found there at Sepphoris. Now we move to Capernaum, the house of Peter. What's the evidence that this is the house of Peter? How do we know that, Dr. House?
Oh, we know it because there's a lot of evidence that a church actually was formed here that goes from the early 2nd century, at least that early. And obviously Peter he was living in Capernaum at the time. So that's probably the place.
Do you believe that was there the sign of the fish was used early on by Christians? Was that ever found here?
I don't think it was found inside the structure, but they know from the structure how churches were built later after this. And it's pretty well it's the structure of a church. You got to put together why a church, why Capernaum, and it just made sense based on tradition that it was. There's not anything that strictly says that, but it's probably accurate.
Probably the most famous boat that was discovered is the Galilee boat found near the Sea of Galilee, also nicknamed the Jesus boat, but there's no wood sign Jesus slept here. But it's actually made of different types of wood, and they have a museum now where you can visit this boat. Very famous boat that was discovered during a time when the water had receded there at the Sea of Galilee. Go ahead, Todd. You had a question or comment?
Yeah, a question about Peter's house. Is that the same location where they used to have, or they had a church like kind of built up on stilts above it, or is that it?
Right now, the Roman Catholics, this is a Roman Catholic site, and they have a gigantic church above it, and you can look down through the glass right into the structure below. So that's
an older picture. That was an older picture before they built that.
Yeah, they built on that.
Pool of Bethesda. Several different important pools here have been found that relate to the Gospels. Here we're back to Chorazin and the seat of Moses. What's that? What's the significance of the seat of Moses in a synagogue? Jesus condemned the Pharisees because they sat on the seat of Moses, right? Matthew 23.
Actually, Jesus said, those that sit on the seat of Moses, you need to pay attention to what they say. You don't practice what they practice because they were hypocrites, but you believe what they say. They taught theology. Jesus largely followed a Pharisaic theology in his teaching.
Caesarea Philippi, what happened there? Where Peter confessed that Jesus is the Christ,
Yes.
the Son of the living God. Interesting. You see that cave there? There's a grotto to Pan, a Greek god there. What's significant about this this cave? Anybody know? Anybody read about that yet?
Supposed to be the gateway into Sheol.
Yes, to Hades.
Gates of Hades.
Yes. Yeah, right. And as that relates to what Jesus said, that the gates of Hades will not prevail against, I believe the gates of Hades are a reference to death, right? That Hades is a place of departed spirits, so the gate of Hades would be death. Death will not defeat the church.
Right.
It's good to know that.
Also, a temple to Augustus, the Caesar is there.
Yes.
There. Yeah.
Yep. And the Pool of Siloam, which I'm excited to see again, because much excavation work has been done here. Any further word on that?
Yeah, let me say, this Pool of Siloam is a 4th century Byzantine that nobody knew that this was not the original, because that's all you had, because it comes right out of Hezekiah's tunnel. It was because a water main broke underneath this area right here, and when they started digging, they came across steps. Archaeologists came in, and now we have this. They're working right now on extending it because they've got permission all the way.
I also have watched a video where archaeologists was showing that Jewish pilgrims in coming up to the Temple Mount would stop here at the Pool of Siloam on a road that led up to the Temple Mount. We're going to be able to do that when we're in Jerusalem?
Let me tell you something. I have climbed this before, and you don't want to. If you start at the Pool of Siloam here and do what I've done before and walk up to the Temple Mount, I was so dead tired I could hardly stand up. But this goes right by the entrance to the city of David, which goes down the hill. But they now have found the actual steps that they're intact, that go right up to the Temple Mount. And they've finally uncovered it all. You can actually do that if you want to do it.
It's quite amazing. I watched the archaeologists do it. There's a video on that. You can search for it. Have you been to the tomb of Lazarus?
Me, yes.
Yep. So here's an ossuary box. Do you believe it's authentic? Joseph Caiaphas?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Very ornate.
Ornate. And interesting to think about that. He was the one that condemned Jesus, tore his robe. Here's the Pontius Pilate inscription.
There it is. Now take a look at that just a second. I have examined this pretty carefully, and I just can't find all that idea that you read.
Right.
What I'm saying, when I read this, I said, I can understand a person saying it's a dedication. I understand that, but not all this verbiage that you gave me. Maybe I'm off somewhere.
Well, you know that I was reading that what was in the official booklet from Caesarea.
I know. I don't know.
So tell us a little bit about this. What's significant about the heel bone here, this crucifixion victim?
This is it. This is all we have. This is actually a heel bone with a Roman nail through it that bent. And now they did find more to the person, but they found a crucified criminal, and this sort of shows us where they do it. This shows that, at least in the way they did the nailing a person to the cross, it's not as the normal picture depicts, because if you go through the top of the heel, it just fractures it all out. This goes through the soft area that goes right through the bone on the bottom. So this gives us clarification to that.
So you think that the feet of Jesus were on either side of the wood rather than in front of the wood as depicted?
There's two ways it could be done. One is if you had a long enough nail, you would put it on both sides and knock it through. But there also is another way to do it. It doesn't make it where, like we do, you have the hands out and the feet together and all that, like that. If he was bent his knees, which some have it as, and then you had a piece of wood that was put against the feet, you would nail it through that all the way through. And that may be the way. They weren't concerned about making it look like a crucifix. They were just trying to nail somebody up on a piece of wood.
I was always taught, though, that the only way Jesus could have survived for 6 hours on the cross, 9 a.m. to 3, he had to be able to push up with his feet to be able to breathe, or else he would have died of his asphyxiation.
But either way you do that, though, you can push up. Because the only way that you didn't, if obviously it depends on how far down they put the nails in, as for how you're connected onto the cross. But you can always go up and down the way they did it. They didn't just stretch you out like a stretcher, not allow you. You had flexibility here. It's an extremely painful kind of experience. Yeah.
Church of the Holy Sepulchre,
Almost
Garden Tomb. You did talk about both of those. Nazareth degree. Anybody know anything about that?
I didn't talk to them about that.
Yeah.
You want to know what it is?
No, I'm just asking them if they know. Anybody know what this is?
Is
Read
that the
about
one
this
where
yet?
I haven't read about it, but from memory, I think I remember this has something to do with the decreeing for people not to say that someone was raised from the dead or something or other because of the crucifixion or the resurrection of Christ.
No. Well,
what makes it significant is its capital punishment for tomb robbing as it relates to Nazareth. Of course, Caesar didn't. He knew that it was Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified, but this was a later Caesar that this decree was put out about, I believe. Isn't that right?
it was early 40s when they did it.
Okay.
You got to allow time for travel of ideas and times at the time. It didn't work as fast, but it makes only sense on why would the Caesar come out with you can't rob graves, except for the fact that they were having trouble with Christians who claimed that Jesus came back from the dead. So that's the connection people make. What's the rationale for doing this thing?
And why the change in punishment to capital punishment for this? Obviously, it's influencing Christianity, influencing many people.
Yeah.
Oh, the Shroud of Turin. We have to talk about that.
I'm writing a novel on it right now with a guy he's written several novels and a couple movies, and we're doing.
No one has been able to explain how this Middle Eastern cloth has a picture of a crucified man. They've never been able to duplicate it in terms of painting, and studies have been shown that it is real blood on the shroud. If it is the burial cloth, we have a confirmation of, first of all, the crucifixion, the beating, the scourging, as well as
let me quickly say
what Jesus might have looked like.
Let me say something quickly about this. First of all, Gary Habermas, who is probably the number one expert in the world on the resurrection of Christ, thinks it's genuine. I have investigated it myself. I think it's genuine. There are some people who have questioned it based on carbon dating, but they actually were not dating. They were not actually testing the shroud. They tested something that had been sewn to the shroud and found that was actually only a few hundred years old. But when you do the negative here, you actually come out with a person's. I've seen it. The real negative from it. You have a person's face. You have the hands which have been crucified. There's no question, and you have to think that the women, when they left Christ, who he had folded up his clothes, he was taught by Mary very well. He folded up his clothes after he left the room, that they would have probably picked it up and taken it with them. That was very.
They would not have left it in the tomb for sure. The James ossuary, we finished with this. which some say is historically accurate. I mean, the Israel Antiquities Authority did not say it was not.
I've done a pretty thorough research on this when I actually wrote on it in that book that Joe Holden and that did. Okay, I worked on the article on this, and I think this is actually a genuine article. I don't think it's a fake. And by the way, the only people that actually ever examined it, as far as being scholars in handwriting and scholars in ancient writing, both of them said it was genuine. And the people that investigated it were people like you. It's like this. It's like you have a doctor, it's a heart doctor, and you have him, he says, well, this actually was a heart attack. And then a guy who, let's say, is a foot doctor comes and says, I don't think this is a heart attack, actually. So you have to say, who are the people that have the knowledge of the area? And the Israeli Antiquities did not want this to be legitimate because you got too much writing on it. And yet the people who are epigraphers who studied it said it is genuine. So I think it's probably a genuine article.
James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus.
Right.
External historical verification, Jesus. It's interesting. You got the three people that are related. You got James, he was the half brother of Jesus, and you've got Joseph. So it's pretty strong. The patina indicates, the patina which was inside the letters indicates that it was from the 1st century. I just read when I was teaching James how James was martyred, pushed off the Temple Mount, and so that was interesting. Then he was stoned. So you think about it, his body was then buried, obviously, and then if this is his ossuary, a year later, the bones would have been placed in this ossuary. So that's fascinating to think about that. I think the main problem is that it's an unprovenanced article that was found in Golan's his house.
Right.
We don't know exactly where it was found.
That's the issue, the provenance of it. But the actual event, whether this